Story. A lowly child beggar, a noble prince, a monster viewed as the enemy of the entire world. If you possess all three identities at the same time, which identity would you choose to help you earn a better ending? Thales did not have the answer. He only knew that he came to a different and magnificent world, and he had to face a future that was as difficult to handle as a nightmare. The glorious empire had already been destroyed for 1,000 years, the dying royal family suffered many problems, the legendary sacred battle had plenty of conspiracies, the divided world was in chaos. But Thales had nothing. The only thing he had left was an unswerving determination to preserve his own identity, bravery which would allow him to survive in a perilous situation, and a belief that he would never submit to principles he did not believe. A king does not gain respect by virtue of his bloodline. The bloodline's glory rests on the deeds of the king. Darkness will baptize light, fire will create true steel. The Forbidden Prince's story starts here. Chapter 31 Little Girl. A question. If a person saw Kayako crawling down the stairs at a swift pace, how would he or she feel? If anyone asked Thales that question at that moment, he would definitely answer in rage while crying, he would definitely feel like how I do now. Because the ghost mummy monster, who cares what it is? Is it important? Thales, after he recovered from his fear, was dragging its incomplete and roasted body on all fours while crawling on the ground bizarrely at lightning speed. God damn it. Thales could practically feel his soul leaving his body in fear. He did not even think about whether this creature had any form of intelligence, whether it could talk, and whether they could talk it out, and not fight. At that moment, as Thales ran around desperately in the small room, he could even feel his tears escaping uncontrollably from his eyes. However, Thales soon came to regret his decision. There was no other reason. The speed of the monster that looked like a mummy had already surpassed Thales. It emitted a roar and hopped, pouncing on Thales' back, causing him to fall. Bang! Asterisk. Thales rolled on the ground with the mummy before landing on his back. The experiences he gained during the past 2 seriously unfortunate, extraordinary days seemed to have come into effect. Thales instinctively pulled out JC's dagger with a reverse grip and stabbed the mummy with trembling hands. He ruthlessly stabbed the mummy right in the heart, if it even has one. However, Thales discovered, to his terror, that even though the dagger had stabbed right through the mummy, it was still lying unaffected on his body. It opened its large, black, and terrifying mouth towards his throat while revealing blackened, jagged teeth. Could it be that I'm too scared and my hands are trembling too much, that's why I didn't manage to stab its heart? Thales thought in trepidation as he felt the weight pressing on his body. That's strange, it's not heavy. But he did not have time to regret his decision. Rip, asterisk. As the dull sound of something being ripped apart rang in the air, Thales despaired as the mummy bit through the skin on his neck. Intense pain racked his body. Thales opened his mouth in agony, but being as exhausted as he was, he could only emit hoarse cries. Due to the pressure on his body, all the blood in Thales' body gushed towards the artery that had been torn through. It's over, Thales thought in despair. If a person kills, then he must also be prepared to be killed. He remembered these words, then remembered Quide, who had died unwillingly as he clutched onto his neck. Thales laughed bitterly in his heart. Karma is AB*TCH. Yet strangely, the blood that should originally be gushing out everywhere from his wound was flowing into the mummy's mouth silently and in an orderly manner. Thales, whose throat was still in between the mummy's teeth, found, to his shock and terror when he saw from the corners of his eyes, that the mummy's body acted like a water pipe that had uneven amounts of water charging through its tunnels. Its mouth, to its throat, chest, abdomen, torso, and other parts of its body were swelling up, contracting, and squirming continuously. It was like a thirsty traveler that drank madly from a spring, and the water tasted like rain that fell after a long drought. That mummy seemed to be sucking his blood. Within a few seconds, as he lost more blood, Thales' physical consciousness began to fade away, but the consciousness in his soul became more alert. It became so alert that everything in his mind appeared once again before his eyes like a movie. Wu Kiran, what would happen if people like you who are afraid of ghosts really ran into ghosts? Could you please not talk about that? We just finished watching The Grudge 2 nights ago. I still don't dare walk up the stairs at night alone, okay? Don't be scared. If you really ran into a ghost, bite it. Bite its throat, if it doesn't have a neck or a head. Are you insane? Stop it, stop. When you're feeling tired from writing your thesis and you lift up your head to stretch your neck, suddenly. Wu Kiran took a step forward in anger born from embarrassment, then used the method he was most accustomed with to seal that person's mouth. Then, as he tasted the sweet taste of her mouth, he saw her eyes, filled with laughter. The eyelashes were very long, and her eyes were bright. Really, what a sly and crafty girl. Wu Kiran closed his eyes, frustrated, and continued tasting his prize. Or perhaps should he say that he was actually offering tribute to the true victor. Another memory returned and was included with all Thales' other memories. However, this memory seemed to differ from the rest. Once it returned to his mind, it did not fall asleep like the others of its kind. Instead, It expanded instantly and grew in size before it trembled in his mind, causing Thales, who had been immersed in the memories from his past life, to be forced out of this illusory consciousness. Thales' eyes flew open. During that instant, he seemed to have suddenly gained strength. That mummy was still sucking his blood without a care for anything else, as if it would not stop until it drained him completely dry. And it continued sucking until a 7-year-old boy's hand seized the spot connecting its shoulders and neck firmly and forcefully. If you really ran into a ghost. Thales gritted his teeth, seized the mummy's body, and with his remaining strength, he lifted his head desperately. Bite it. He opened his mouth, revealing his small, baby teeth. Bite its throat. Then, like a creature without intelligence, he bit down on the mummy's throat fiercely. They looked like a pair of lovers that were necking each other. Time seemed to have frozen until a loud crack resounded in the air out of nowhere. The burnt, dried mummy's neck was not as tough as he imagined it to be, and a piece of flesh crumbled as Thales bit down on its neck. That piece mystery meat was chewed on indignantly by Thales before he swallowed it. A sentence that did not suit the atmosphere suddenly flashed in Thales' mind. Tastes like chicken, crispy, too. Then, he continued to passionately and frantically bite down on the mummy's wound, in large bites. Just like the vampires in the Cullen family. A foul and salty liquid suddenly gushed into Thales' mouth. This crimson liquid flowed into his throat as he sucked it in large mouthfuls desperately. It was like how his blood was flowing into the mummy's body swiftly as if there was a pump installed. Similarly, the foul and salty liquid from the mummy's body was being rapidly sucked into his mouth. However, the mummy did not seem to possess any intelligence, and neither did it feel anything, just like how Thales had descended into a state of madness and how his mind had gone blank. However, just a few seconds later, he shuddered together with the burnt, dried, and rotting mummy. Ah! Immediately afterward, while drinking his blood, the mummy seemed to shiver and it loosened its bite around Thales' neck. It let out a piercing roar and swiftly pushed Thales away. Once Thales was shoved away, he became stunned for 2 seconds, as he was overwhelmed by a feeling of relief that he had just survived through a disaster before he instantly lifted his hand and touched the wound on the artery of his neck. Strangely, even though blood should be spilling all over the place from his neck, not a single drop of blood was dripping out. There were only 2 warm puncture marks that gave off a numbing sting where his wound should be, and they felt sticky. The mummy seemed to have rediscovered the thing called fear in that dark room. Once it pushed Thales away, it covered the spot on its neck where it had also been bitten. Thales' dagger was still in its chest, and it limped towards the black coffin where it had crawled out from. Thales did not fall into a daze. He stood up, shivering, and found that his physical strength, which had almost been depleted just now, had recovered slightly. It was just that the taste in his mouth, ew, it's a little disgusting. Hang on, what's going on with that mummy? There might be a countless number of questions rising in his head, but he still pounced without any hesitation on the mummy that was fleeing in its pathetic state. There's no way you'll always be lucky. Now, we have a score to settle. As Thales let out an enraged roar, he extended his hands and pulled the mummy down. The mummy did not stop moving as it fell and rolled on the ground. As Thales was just about to get to know it with his teeth again, it jumped up in a shocking manner, reaching an exaggerated height, seized the edge of the black coffin, and, with an unsightly posture, flipped back into the coffin. As for Thales, who had seized one of its legs, he plunged into the gigantic black stone coffin along with it. Thump, asterisk. It was as if Thales had fallen into a puddle of water. A warm and wet liquid submerged his entire body. This taste, it's foul and salty, it's blood. Thales wrapped his arms tightly around the struggling and squirming mummy from its back. Before he completely lost consciousness, because he was drowning in blood, a smile appeared on Thales' lips as he was submerged in blood. Thank goodness, he thought with his muddled mind, thank goodness this guy still has a neck, and its head is still intact. Sometime later, Thales woke up in the mysteriously dry, black coffin. He had no idea how much time had passed. When he opened his eyes, Thales dragged himself up into a seated position. The first thing he did after that was to cough violently and cough up all the blood and water in his body. Cough, 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 cough. Thales licked a foreign object in his mouth and instantly registered what it was. As a wave of nausea rose in him, he spat it out. He panted again and took about a few dozen seconds to recover. Right at the next moment, Thales' right hand touched the spot by his side and he sensed something cold from a dried-up thing. The mummy. Thales continued touching it until he was certain that the mummy that had chased him around and had forced him to flee like a bird to the mountains had shattered into a good dozen-something pieces, and had scattered everywhere in the gigantic coffin. He exhaled a breath and chased away the disgusting taste in his mouth. It was dark in the black coffin. Thales continued groping his way about in the cold coffin. Once he touched something that felt like a step, he stood on tiptoes and climbed out of the black coffin, that was as tall as an average man's height, with great difficulty. This thing isn't like a coffin but more like a children's pool. As Thales thought about this, he came to understand how that small mummy had been able to climb out of such a tall coffin. By using both his hands and feet, he finally climbed out of the black coffin and crashed onto the ground with a thud. The familiar sounds of battle traveled to his ears. The sounds of a woman rebuking someone and the count's shouts as he yelled his commands did not go unnoticed either. Thales' face was down on the ground. As he massaged his shoulder, which was aching due to the fall, he painstakingly pushed up his upper body. I wonder what is the situation of the battle outside. Only then did Thales lift his head. And he was then stunned. Right before his eyes stood a single person. It was a small person. More accurately speaking, it was a small figure with long, silver hair falling down her shoulders. She looked a pitiable sight as she stood under the moonlight, and she was trotting forward with unstable footsteps. With great effort, she took one step. With great strength, she took another step. With each step the small figure took, she would stop, and swayed as she walked towards Thales, who had just crawled out of the black coffin. She continued walking until, with much difficulty, she stood before him. She had red irises, a pale face, tender skin, delicate limbs, and an adorable face that still had some baby fat on it. However, at that moment, this small person was staring at Thales on the ground coldly and even arrogantly while looking down on him. Thales remained stunned for a time and also pondered for a long while before he struggled to his feet with a lot of questions floating in his mind. Then, he saw the girl's entire body clearly. She still did not say a single word, only continued looking at him with a cold and stern gaze. After a long while, Thales seemed to have come to a sudden realization of something. The abnormal 7-year-old boy blushed, a sight that was rarely found on him, and he scratched his head before he let out an awkward laugh. Little girl. He lowered his voice with slight embarrassment, and while faltering over his words, he hesitantly asked in a weak voice, why aren't you, wearing clothes? The little girl who was not wearing clothes was standing all by her lonesome on the ground, and she was a full head shorter than this frail, 7-year-old boy. She regarded the boy with hostility. When Thales received no answer, he felt even more awkward. Thankfully, this awkward atmosphere only lasted for several seconds, because Thales suddenly realized a spot in the little girl's chest. There was a dagger stuck in there. The blood on the dagger had yet to dry up. There were 2 letters carved on the blade. J.C. Thales' hand that was scratching his head froze up in an instant. The boy no fool. Besides, even the retarded antagonists in those simplistic novels who had plot armor protecting them would have their IQ rising at this point. Of course he would remember how he had stabbed the mummy's heart with the dagger just now. However, the naked, little girl, who did not seem to think that being naked was abnormal, was staring at him coldly. She did not speak. The expression on her round face was calm. Thales' figure was reflected upside down on her blood-red irises. Thales put his hand down gently and regulated his breathing. His eyes were trained on the adorable but strange little girl in front of him, and as he looked at her, his mind began switching her figure back and forth with the terrifying phantom mummy in his memories. This is seriously abnormal. Thales exhaled deeply. The naked red-eyed mummy girl was still staring at him with the gaze of a statue. Anyone else in his place would begin to feel their skin crawl once they were stared at in such a bizarre fashion by this thing for such a long time. Thales forcefully gulped, then put on a relaxed look and smiled. Once he mulled over it, he forcefully bit back on asking her which sunscreen brand she used. This is not a good time to test her. She might look cute, but if she's the mummy from just now, then most probably, she won't have any intelligence. Who are you? A young voice rose into the air before him. Yup, even though the little girl's gaze still hasn't changed, but the words she said are quite clear, understandable, and rational. Compared to the mummy's roars that sounded as if it was coming back to life, her voice is so sweet, cute, and... Hold it. Thales widened his eyes in shock and scrutinized the extremely strange girl with silver hair and red irises. She can speak. She possessed intelligence. She's not wearing clothes. No. She can communicate. Then, Thales' mind, which seemed to have disappeared from his life for ages due to his shock, started working smoothly in that familiar manner he was accustomed to. Translator's notes. 1. Kayako, from The Grudge. Chapter 32 Friendly Fire. A long time ago, Eastern City District was just the suburbs of Eternal Star City's northeast region. That was the time before Prince Tormund brought the survivors from the final empire and pointed at the stars above his head as he swore to build Constellation where Eternal Star City was located. As Constellation's power rose and its territory expanded, the structure of authority for the upper class in the kingdom began to grow. The number of feudal lords, nobles, and officials increased. The important people in the capital were unwilling to live in the same area as the vulgar merchants, the commoners, the filthy prostitutes, the thieves, and the hoodlums. That was why they built their homes in the suburbs in the northwest region. Gradually, this area became the spot where the nobles built their manors. It was soon included under Eternal Star City's rule by the town hall and became the most important area in the city, aside from the central region and Morning Star region. The feudal lords who defend the entire country, the popular and influential people in the court, and even the foreign dignitaries who were exiled from their homeland, all loved to build their mansions and manors in this place. This place was filled with properties belonging to large and small nobles as well as officials. There were practically no apartments for commoners or any sort of bazaars. Even the people who walked on the streets were mostly the servants and subordinates who belonged to each clan. Besides the stupidly exorbitant land prices, there was also an unspoken rule in Eastern City District: the people who buy a piece of land here must have an equally matching status as the land they chose. No one should want to know the consequences of the people who violated this rule. Even the 6 great clans and the 13 distinguished families had built their own estates in Eastern City District, despite having their own manors in other parts of the capital. Naturally, they were all located in the best parts of the region, no matter whether the nobles in these families came to these manors often or not. It was precisely because of this that the manors and mansions were located far apart from each other, and this was only possible because the area in Eastern City District was already enormous, to begin with. The grass and trees between the manors had been kept in stellar condition by the town hall, which was why they were all lush and strong. The main street had also been built wild. It was a stable road, and there were large everlasting lamps, provided by the town hall, placed one in every 20 meters on that street. The police and city defense team that patrolled this street would have to be cautious. If they offended these big shots, not even their superiors would be able to bear the consequences. Yet at the same time, their jobs were also very relaxing. Usually, when they ran into a matter that required the police and city defense team to intervene, the nobles would have their own ways of solving the matter most of the time. Outsiders did not need to trouble themselves with it. Gennard had practically never used the sword and bow on his person during his 10 years as the leader of the city defense team that patrolled the main street in Eastern City District all year long. His helmet and armor shone as if new. When he ran into the nobles' carriages on the street, he would, on habit, straighten his armor, then take a step back and take off his helmet to salute these people. In the words of the director of the police department in the Eastern City District, the city defense team should have changed their heavy helmets into hats. Taking off their helmets as a salute was simply too hilarious. Gennard valued his job very much. He knew that his comrades had spent a great deal of effort and transferred him to the capital city defense team when he was originally supposed to look for his own means of survival after the army was disbanded. Besides, he had even transferred to the Eastern City District, the safe and quiet Eastern City District where the residents there would even occasionally give him tips. As a farmer born in Doran County, which was located to the south of Constellation, Gennard's exciting experiences would definitely be worthy of a bardic song. About a decade ago, when he was around 19 years old, Gennard never bothered remembering his own birthday after his father died. A disaster fell upon his entire village. Bandits who had gathered together had invaded their village and robbed them. Gennard, who had no means to survive, responded to the call from a duke in the south and enlisted himself in Duke John's Starlight Brigade. Gennard, who fought valiantly and had a bright head over his shoulders, had gone through the perilous battle to defend Jade City and fortunately managed to survive. He once took the risk of carrying 2 sacks of flour and managed to catch up to the brigade who had been retreating into Walla Passage. He followed the Duke valiantly and charged into the barricades around the Land of Ivory. "Before we unite with the other troops, we owe you money for the 2 sacks of flour, Duke John." Under the orders of his superiors, he had also charged into Count Dilbert's welcoming banquet, which was held in the Count's house, and had watched Duke John, who had been a guest, deal with their private army without so much as batting an eyelid. He had even rushed out from under the wave of the impact caused by mystic spears in Spark Prairie and crushed a battle axe. He had also led a small troop of soldiers under the Duke's 9-pointed star banner and fended against their last, desperate charge at Blades Gap. Made a final charge when the blades of the rebel army were pointed at their throats, and managed to turn the tables and won. On the day of his final battle, the Battle of Zadra, Gennard let out a deep sigh and cursed the day where victory and sadness existed together. He waved at his team members and had them clear a path for the knights under the iris flower flag. There were 34 knights under the Covendier family. No carriages were moving with them, so they should only be subordinates who were running some errand for their master. The 2 men leading the team seemed to possess abilities above superclass. As for the others, based on their movements and the spots they placed their weapons, they were just there for show. Gennard discreetly pursed his lips and retreated to one side of the street. Within just a short year and a few months, he had been promoted from a transport corps officer to a recruit, then to an axeman, an infantry unit leader, and finally, the most honorable title of them all, the Duke's personal guard. Gennard had transformed from a farmer who did not even know how to hold a sword, to a splendid commander who had fought in many battles. His rare experiences in battle had also made him a rare sight within those in the ordinary class. As long as he had 3 to 5 companions setting up a formation with him, then even if they ran into superclass warriors, Gennard would be a great fighter who would not retreat. Even after the Starlight Brigade was disbanded, Gennard still remembered the teachings from the respected leader of the Duke's personal guards, and he never once missed his training. He had once seen many knights during those days which he dubbed as the most dangerous days in his life. Some of these warriors, who were famous for their charging power on horseback, were heroic, skilled, and brave men. But there were also those who were cowardly, useless good-for-nothings who only knew how to bully the weak and cower before the strong. Of course, those in the former numbered far more than the latter when he was still in the brigade under Duke John's command. That was why Gennard could tell with just one glance that the two knights in the lead were elites who had some experience in battle before, based on their smooth movements despite the calm expression on their faces, their slightly bent backs that would allow them to gain leverage while they were on horseback at any moment, and how the swords on their waists and saddles were close to their dominant hands. These elites who were above super class were definitely high-ranked officers in an offense unit, be it vanguards, assault teams, defense teams, reserve squads, or even personal guards for commanders. These people were the essential backbones and cores of an army, like the famous Baron Araka Merc in the kingdom. Right then, these two, leading 20-something knights, should have passed them by, but one of the two elites tugged on his reins to make his horse stop before he rode towards Gennard. City Defense Team. This was a balding knight in his 30s. His green, patterned, light armor was clearly a beautifully handcrafted piece of treasure that was a family heirloom. He had a stoic look on his face as he looked down on Gennard from his horse and demanded from the leader of the City Defense Team. We saw horse hoofprints from a large group on the way. During this hour, there should not be this many cavaliers appearing in Eastern City District. Have you seen them? And you should be here. Gennard looked at the noble knights under the tricolor iris flower and whispered in his heart with derision. However, after working in the City Defense Team for 10 years, his temper was already gone. The former personal guard of Duke John bowed his head respectfully and submissively before he answered, "My esteemed lord, only feudal lords are able to dispatch large batches of private soldiers in Eastern City District. We do not dare pry into their matters." Seychelles, who was Duke Zion's trusted knight, frowned. "Did you run into these cavaliers? Which clan do they belong to? What flag did they ride under?" Gennard fell into momentary silence. Around 10 minutes ago, the 32 knights that had passed this place by, were composed of those from ordinary class up to super class. The leader was a noble and moved dexterously, but was clearly not a soldier. There was even a woman trailing behind him, but Gennard did not see any flags over them. However, how could he not recognize the soldiers, movements, equipment, and their shield models after he had served so many years under Duke John's banner? When he had been in the Duke's team of personal guards, there was quite a large number of private soldiers the Duke had brought out of his own clan to go with him to the south as his personal guards. Some of those people had saved his life before, and he had also saved them. They were almost all good men, and a woman, who he could entrust his back to, and all of them did not put their title as warriors under the 9-pointed star flag to shame. That's right, Gennard told himself once again, those 30-something cavaliers are members of the Jadestar family, and the private soldiers of the royal family. More importantly, they were members of Duke John's family, whom Gennard had sworn to serve until the end of his life. Indeed, my esteemed lord, Gennard answered firmly, we ran into them just now. They did not put up any flag, and neither do I know where they have gone to. Duke John's former personal guard bowed. Such irony. When he was serving under Duke John, who had been the king's younger brother, no one had taught him how to bow to a noble. Yet on the second day he arrived in the capital, a low-ranking officer from the town hall had taught him the standard way to bow while seething with anger. They are nobles, understand, Gennard's former superior in the City Defense Team. However, this ordinary City Defense Team captain might not know just how great of an effect he would bring to Constellation's future by keeping the information to himself. Seychelles frowned, then reached into his gold pouch and grabbed a handful of coins. Once he threw a silver coin, and another gold coin which he grabbed accidentally, back into the pouch. He scattered the remaining copper coins to the soldiers in the City Defense Team. "Your tip," he said, then made his horse turn around and gallop forward so that he could catch up to his companions. "Don't think too much into it, and don't bother about the clans as well. We just have to do what the Duke asked us to do. With the both of us here, as long as it isn't about infiltrating Renaissance Palace, there isn't anything in the capital that we can't solve. If the vampires don't work with us, they will only end up dead." Seychelles returned to the head of the ground and listened to the calm Cassane speak softly by his side. "If they are from the other clans, then why didn't they put up their flags? A cavalier unit of about 30 to 40 people with unknown identities charged into Eastern City District late at night. How long has it been since this sort of thing happened?" Seychelles said with a cautious tone. He had journeyed to the chaotic battlefield in Main Ed Nox Regnum and had learned how to be cautious as well as meticulous from the sagely citizens to the east. His Majesty's 48th birthday is around the corner. This birthday is too crucial. All the messengers from the nobles around the country, the ambassadors from the suzerains, territories, as well as the forces of power that lurk in the dark corners of the country, be they big or small, will gather in the capital. You can even say that all the eyes from the entire world will be gathered here. The great clans in the country are also taking action on many fronts. Their plans may be in plain sight or in the dark, and this is completely normal. Are we not doing the same thing? We're even working hard towards it. Cassane turned his head around and stated flatly, if you're really that worried, then once you have finished your task, go back and make a report. This has nothing to do with our mission. Let us hope it is. Seychelles touched the sword by his waist. When he remembered the city defense team leader with the sharp gaze just now, he said absent-mindedly, let's hope it isn't something by the other clans. Do not worry, Lord Seychelles, Cassane said languidly. At this point in time, besides the forces of power that serve the royal family, all actions taken that support the 19 noble families will be seen as acts of betrayal. And how could a traitor of the nobles succeed in the king selection? Ellipsis. A brilliant light shone in Jine's eyes as she avoided the two blood slaves that had charged towards her in a crazed dash. With a flick of her wrist, the silver chainsword in her hand jerked upwards and bound them together. The other two Jadestar family swordsmen of eradication moved forwards in a show of great teamwork and plunged the silver swords in their hands straight into the two blood slaves' hearts. However, the female official seemed to have sensed something during that instant. She crouched down and rolled to the side, avoiding the sharp claw that had suddenly appeared. When the blood clanswoman, Rolana, saw that she was unable to hit Gines with one single move, she turned around swiftly and warded off two silver swords. Then, with one piercing scream, she retreated swiftly. Hissing sounds followed in her wake. I'm still not used to using this new right arm. It's limiting my actual abilities, thought Rolana in anger. That damned, thrice-cursed, half-crippled psionic. Hey, you blood-sucking whore. Next time, be more accurate. I've seen plenty of you vampires committing crimes in the city. I've even personally captured a blood clan count from Ola's family before. Gines sat up fiercely. She swung her long, slender arms and the chainsword instantly bound itself around Rolana's left leg. Then, she wrapped the chainsword around her own right arm, and a bizarre, powerful strength surged from her arm as she yanked the chain ruthlessly. Rolana, who had just avoided a sword flash, staggered before she fell to the ground. She screamed as she was continuously dragged across the floor. This female mortal's strength, is she a monster? Rolana roared and seized the ground to resist Gines' monstrous strength, but before she could gain her footing, another silver sword tried to stab her. This damned sword formation, Rolana cursed in her heart. She absolutely could not make full use of her superhuman speed and unique abilities when she faced this sort of enemy. The Starlight formation was a circular, defensive formation. The main parts of the formation were the small teams formed by a handful of people jutting out from the edges. They were the antennas and the explorers of the entire formation. They also allowed the entire formation to agilely press forward and retreat during a scuffle. Rolana carefully avoided the silver swords while resisting Gines' monstrous strength and kicking away the swordsmen that were ambushing her. The blood slaves were dwindling in numbers as they were trapped in the sword formation's encirclement. After all, how could monsters without intelligence hope to fight against swordsmen who had fought in hundreds of battles? Gilbert, as Gines let out an enraged shout, she tightened her grip on the chain in her hands. Where is the child? We've been held back by these two and a bunch of lunatics for so long, you better have a justifiable plan. On the other side of the formation was the entrance to the house. Over there was Gilbert, with one hand wielding a sword and the other a staff. He was working together with a few swordsmen of eradication and attacking the blonde Istrone after surrounding him. Yodel is held back by the other person. That man is also in supreme class, Gilbert said with a frown. But since we're all held back here, we can only trust him. You are all a bunch of incompetent men. Gilbert did not bother himself with Gines' verbal abuse. He turned his attention back to Istrone. It was precisely this clansman who had kidnapped Thales from under the 8 guards' noses with his extraordinary speed and had even taken away the guards' lives. Istrone's unique, inborn talent was that he had the speed that surpassed the average member of a blood clan. Even though he was still in super class, his speed had already surpassed most of his peers of the same level. However, just tonight alone, he had already met 2 mortal enemies who were both also in super class, and both were completely unafraid of his extraordinary speed. One of them was Blood Bottle Gang's Nikolai. Istrone had seen that person's first few moves clearly. Nikolai had completely been unable to catch up to Istrone's speed, but for some unknown reason, after they exchanged a few blows, Nikolai's speed and reflexes became increasingly faster, and during the most crucial moment of the battle, Nikolai's punching speed and bodily reflexes were equal to Istrone's. If Chris had not suddenly intervened, Istrone had a feeling that Nikolai's speed would surpass his in the end. The second one made Istrone's skin crawl, and he was the elegant and dignified middle-aged man standing before him, who made fear rise in Istrone's heart. Gilbert was the same as Nikolai. He, too, could not catch up to Istrone's speed, but this noble had used his own method to suppress the high speed which Istrone prided himself with. The silver sword in Gilbert's right hand was very stable. His footsteps were filled with the elegance possessed by nobles as they fought, but what Istrone was worried about was not his sword. The blonde blood clansman could easily handle the speed of the sword, and could even flip over 2 swordsmen as he dodged it. What he was worried about was the staff in Gilbert's left hand. Compared to the orthodox sword style he used, the staff looked as if it was wielded by someone else. Every single time Istrone dodged or blocked a silver sword and was just about to counterattack, that strange staff would strike him out of nowhere, and it would always hit him in the direction where he was just about to counter without ever missing, or it would hit the crucial joint which he used to gain leverage. He would force Istrone to back down while he nursed grievances in his heart. Then, he would be surrounded by the other swordsmen and be attacked again. It was precisely because of that strange staff that Istrone even had a feeling that he was not holding back Gilbert, but Gilbert was the one holding him back. However, Istrone did not know that he had fallen into Gilbert's trap since the beginning. The key to the martial arts in Gilbert's family, which had been handed down generation to generation, did not lie in the staff, but by the sword in his right hand that moved in an orthodox, ordinary manner. Sir Chris, Istrone's ears twitched. He had heard Rolana's low murmurs during the scuffle. It's very difficult for us to continue holding on. Has Her Highness not woken up yet? If we can't make it here, then let's take the ancestral coffin and retreat. They did not know that Chris, who was holding onto Yodel's short sword in a tight grip, had a face full of shock and disbelief at that moment. This emotion had even affected his opponent, Yodel, who was right before him, his face hidden behind the mask. Chris murmured a few words under his breath. Only Yodel and the members of the Blood clan with superhuman hearing could hear them. The two Supreme Class elites stopped fighting and let go of each other before they pulled back in different directions. Rolana and Istrone heard Chris' murmurs, and their jaws fell slack simultaneously. However, they immediately retreated swiftly, only dodging, never retaliating. Soon, the people who were engaged in a scuffle on the lawns discovered to their shock that the Blood slaves had also retreated to one side as they hissed and roared. Even if they had their heads cut off by the swordsman beside them, they still did not care. Gines looked at Gilbert in shock from her place inside the sword formation. The latter was frowning as he thought about the situation before his eyes. They were not puzzled for long. Thud, 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 asterisk. The sound of footsteps belonging to children traveled swiftly from within the house. Along with those footsteps came a young boy's voice. Everyone. All the people on the lawn saw the same thing. They saw a half-naked Thales, dragging a girl with silver hair dressed in his shirt behind him while panting harshly. They ran out of the door to the ground floor and arrived at the lawn in the manor. Before he could see the situation before him clearly, Thales used all his strength as a 7-year-old and all the methods of conveyance he already knew to shout at the sky with his muddled mind. Stop, we're allies. Friendly fire, knock it off. Right at the moment he finished shouting, the silver-haired girl who had not been able to stop herself in time, since she had been rushing behind Thales, knocked into the boy's back and crashed onto the ground with him. Chapter 33 Long Reign the Blood. The moonlight shone on the lawn of Vine Manor. Everyone stared in shock at the two children lying on the ground. For a while, there was only silence. Thales lied on the floor, breathing heavily. His half-naked body was covered with nothing other than the bandage over his wound. The only thing he could feel was the cold and pain. On the other hand, the silver-haired Loli on his bosom propped up her body by pressing on his shoulder without any expressions on her face. She saw the bandage on his chest, which covered the silver coin-sized burn wound. She smelled the scent of blood on it and revealed an expression of anticipation and mesmerization. This expression frightened Thales and he immediately sat up. Before the dangerous Blood clan girl Thales had long since thought of her as a boss monster who would become a blood-sucking mummy at any time, could reveal her fangs, he pushed her off his bosom. Yodel and Chris immediately appeared in front of the two children. I'm okay, Yodel, don't worry. Thales saw the wound on the secret protector's chest and flashed a tired smile. The latter took off the cape around his leotard and put it over Thales. Thales nodded. Before this, there is something urgent that must be dealt with. He turned to face another direction. There was a large pit with a legless and half-dead person lying inside. The Phantom Wind follower, Meteor Ralph. The person who struggled and broke free of his shackles. A survivor who did not want to escape pain through death. Sir Gilbert, please be sure to save that person. Speaking to Gilbert, who was some distance away, Thales' gaze became dim but determined. If it weren't for him, I probably wouldn't have been able to last until all of you arrived. And also, Thales muttered inwardly, he is the first person I have truly saved in this damned world. Gilbert nodded and commanded the swordsman of eradication beside him to rescue Ralph. Your Highness, Chris' still face was full of excitement. He kneeled in front of the silver-haired Loli on one knee. Trembling, he put the woolen blanket in his hands over her body. Thales' shirt was not big enough and was torn in many places, it only covered the little girl up to her knees. Her two fair calves were exposed. Having thought of this, Chris glared fiercely at Thales. Her Highness was of noble status and she completely paid no heed to these aunt's stares, but as the loyal butler of the Corleone family for more than 600 years, Chris naturally had to take everything into account on behalf of his mistress. Your Highness, you are finally awake. The adorable, red-eyed, little girl nodded without any emotion on her face. She habitually held on to Chris' extended hand and spoke word by word in a tone exclusive to those in power. Quiz, all of you did well. Her face, which still had some baby fat, and looked like a steamed bun, was kept straight and unsmiling as she babbled with a childish, adorable, and unclear voice. Loyalty will definite way be rewarded. Thales, who was beside her, took 2 seconds to understand the sentence, loyalty will definitely be rewarded. And then he laughed out loud. It was truly an appalling sight for a lisping, young, little lowly to speak such solemn words. Chris, who was nodding in gratitude beside him, shot him an angry glare. You are, Your Highness. Rolana and Istrone appeared in front of the little lowly with surprised and bewildered expressions. The former looked at her short stature and asked carefully, why did your appearance become like this? The little lowly raised her crimson pupils and looked at Thales with a complicated expression. She then spoke nonchalantly, as long as I recover my stewing, I will go back to my former appearance. Upon speaking, the little lowly looked at Thales, who was holding back his laughter. She did not look like she was aware of her pronunciation problems. And so, with an ice-cold expression, she asked, slightly puzzled, what is so funny? Thales could no longer hold it back and laughed out loud. At this, the three blood clansmen looked at him with hostile gazes. Istrone's eyes were even tinged with a layer of caution and reverence as he watched Thales. Nothing, ha, cough, cough. Thales immediately masked his laughter with unprofessional coughing sounds. There's nothing funny, ha, cough, cough, I'm sorry. Gilbert and Gines, who had rounded up the swordsman of eradication, walked up to them at the same time. Holding his staff, the former respectfully took off his hat as a salute and said, My esteemed Sir Thales, and this adorable blood clanswoman, would you mind explaining the situation to us? Thales put away his amused expression and looked at Gilbert with gratitude. Sir Gilbert, I thank all of you for rescuing me, and for your sacrifice. However, he suddenly felt that the charming 40-something-year-old lady behind Gilbert was looking at him with a complicated expression. The look in her eyes was profound and indecipherable. Is this the boy, the son he had with, that person? Gines' gaze darkened immediately. Thales did not think too much about it. He turned his head and continued speaking. Let's postpone the self-introductions. Too much blood has been shed tonight. Therefore, along with this, having said this, he glanced at the little lowly, who actually looked very innocent and adorable but chose to keep a straight and unsmiling face, and paused. Looking at the red-eyed lowly's hostile expression, he immediately corrected himself. Little girl, Lady, Serena Corleone, after a friendly and pleasant discussion. The little lowly, Serena, suddenly felt her neck itching slightly. She pouted in a way so that no one would notice she had done just that. We have decided to let go of our hatred, end our hostility, and establish an alliance. I will provide Lady Serena periodically with my blood, whereas Lady Serena and her subordinates will serve me until. Before Thales could finish his sentence, he felt Yodel's hand, which was holding him, tighten abruptly. His sentence was then cut off anxiously by two others. Why should we serve you? We can provide you with other benefits in exchange. If worst comes to worst, we can just walk away, Rolana, the red-haired blood clanswoman said with a hostile countenance. Sir Thales, your blood, this is too dangerous, how can this? This was said by Gilbert, who was anxious to protect his master. However, Thales only abruptly raised his right hand and then clenched his fist tightly. This was a gesture he often made in his past life while leading tutorial classes of undergraduate students, to calm down discussions that were getting more and more heated and irrelevant. The two of them stopped speaking at the same time. The boy sucked in a deep breath. Thales left Yodel, who had been supporting him by the arm, and slowly walked towards the blood clansman, despite Gilbert trying to stop him. He spoke softly, You may serve me in exchange for my protection. As for myself, for you people, a group of homeless political refugees who can only deceive their way around for food and drink by relying on the Corleone banner and the iris flower stamp, I will provide you asylum in Constellation. It is a protection better than what this manor's owner can offer. Chris, Istrone, and Rolana's expression changed at the same time. They looked at Serena. However, the silver-haired lowly with red eyes only snorted coldly. I did NWOT tell him anything. He guessed it BWY himself. Guessed, being on bad terms with Blood Bottle Gang, not being of one mind with the manor's owner, Istrone saying, with our situation right now, and the coffin on the second floor that looks like a swimming pool but is actually a large sickroom. The boy thought quietly in his heart, summing up all these elements and indications, is it not extremely obvious? He knew that the blood clansmen were extremely wary of him, but he did not mind because the problem at hand had, at least, been solved. Thales turned his head and looked at Gilbert and Yodel earnestly. Gilbert, Yodel, please believe in me. I will provide blood under a situation that does not harm my health to aid Lady Serena's, recovery. I made this promise in exchange for my safety just now, along with Her Highness' friendship. Gilbert stared at Thales for a long time. However, Gines, who was behind Gilbert, took a step forward with a complicated expression and said softly, Gilbert, this is a promise he made, and also a promise his family made. Just like what he did years ago, she added quietly in her heart. Gilbert sighed deeply and nodded at Thales. Of course, we believe in you. However, I will report this too. Thales smiled lightly. He turned around so that all the blood clansmen were within his sight, then said softly, then allow me to make a formal introduction. However, before he could finish his sentence, Chris, who was beside him, took a solemn step forward and spoke with a serious tone. Please, Do not trouble yourself. Standing before you, he softly supported the little lowly by the arm as the latter walked forward unsteadily and continued, is the Archduchess, Lady Serena L.A. Corleone, the true heir to the Corleone family, the family that heads the 7 great clans in Eastern Peninsula's Night Kingdom. She is also the legal and legitimate ruler of the Hill of Pain. Chris looked at the mortals with an arrogant gaze. Behind him, Rolana and Istrone displayed proud expressions. With her appearance of a little lowly around 5 or 6 years old, Serena lowered her round face and, holding her non-existent dress, curtsied. She then raised her head, still showing no expression on her face. Thales pouted in his heart. Sure makes her sound powerful. Gilbert and Gines looked at one another. They could see the shock in each other's eyes. After the earth-shattering battle of eradication over 600 years ago, like many other races with a long history, the 13 most noble clans in the Blood Clan were divided into 2 factions, the East and the West, in the 2 directions facing the Sea of Eradication. The 5 clans in the Western Peninsula formed a clan union in the Dark Knight Assembly. They occupied the Grand Banquet Hill, to be more precise, they occupied a piece of land and called it the Grand Banquet Hill. On the other hand, the 8 clans in the Eastern Peninsula established a monarchy system and made their home on the eastern bank of the Sea of Eradication with the name of Night Kingdom. Throughout these 600 over years, compared to their relatives in the Western Peninsula's Grand Banquet Hill who were scattered, not united, and were even forced to sign the Treaty of Subordination between human countries and immortals, under the mighty rule of the infamously ferocious Nightwing King, Laurie Corleone, the Blood Clansmen in Night Kingdom became more united and powerful. They even participated extensively in the peninsula's affairs. In the Second and Third Peninsula War, they dispatched the Sacred Blood Army, which was formed by elite Blood Clan warriors to participate in the battle. In the Third Peninsula War, the Nightwing King had even once personally led his army in attacking Dragon Cloud City, the capital of Western Peninsula's Blade, Extant Kingdom. However, 200 years ago, there was an abrupt change to Night Kingdom's political climate. The Nightwing King mysteriously disappeared. The 8 great clans' foundations were badly shaken. The Hollier family even had the entire clan betray the Night Kingdom by going across the ocean and allying themselves to the Dark Knight Assembly in Grand Banquet Hill. Ever since then, Night Kingdom only had 7 ruling clans left. They also lost the only elite who had hope of breaking into the true class. When they were attacked by Sunrise Church, their strength slowly went into decline. While one party fell, the other rose. For the Dark Knight Assembly in Western Peninsula's Grand Banquet Hill, the 6 great clans made great efforts to build a strong state. They reformed their rotten and outdated system and extensively developed their diplomatic skills. They even became one of the confederates for the Fortress Treaty, and called themselves the Blood Clan's 6 Big Pillars. And the little girl in front of them was claiming to be the master of Night Kingdom's Hill of Pain, the Corleone family lair where the Nightwing King was born. Gilbert raised his head and said respectfully, "Pardon me for being presumptuous, but based on my knowledge, the Night Queen is the master of the Corleone family right now and also happens to be the Hill of Pain's actual ruler. She is also Night Kingdom's current suzerain, the Weeper, Her Majesty Katerina L.A. Corleone." Gilbert deliberately emphasized the pronunciation of the titles, Night Queen, and Her Majesty, highlighting its difference with Serena's, Her Highness. Thales yawned, causing the already annoyed Chris to stare angrily at him again. Serena's red pupils constricted slightly. She pouted and took a step forward. "My CWY baby whittle sister, Katerina, illwegally seized the white I inherited from my father, the Nightwing King. She usurped the Wood Ocean Thwon. However, one day, I will regain my Thwon." With her cheeks that were filled with baby fat tilted slightly and her little hand clenched in front of her chest, she closed her eyes and uttered Corleone family's motto, "Long reign the blood." Istrone and Rolana's expression immediately became solemn. They humbly lowered their chest and clenched their fists at the position over their hearts. Together with Chris, they took a step back, lowered their heads, and chanted, "Long reign the blood." This, Thales felt his mind whirling over the ridiculousness of it all. Why don't you shout, "Unify all lands," as well? I will definitely reward you all for your help and support. Serena opened her eyes and looked fixedly at Thales. She unconsciously licked her lips. "Like biting my neck open." Thales rolled his eyes and avoided the little lowly's fervent gaze. He spoke perfunctorily, "Wow, this is something I wouldn't be able to obtain even if I wished for it. I am extremely honored." Serena puffed her little cheeks as if slightly dissatisfied with Thales' attitude. Looking at Thales' strange demeanor, Istrone recalled that this was probably the same approach Thales had used to order him around. He got annoyed all of a sudden. Looking at Her Highness' expression, he flashed a cold smile and said to Thales, "Little brat, you probably don't know much about the Night Kingdom, which is on the opposite bank of the ocean. Let me put it this way, even if your enemy is Constellation's Supreme King, with the support and protection of our Sacred Blood Army, he definitely would not dare to make things difficult for you." Just as Istrone finished talking, Rolana, who was beside him, felt that something was not right. The countenances of the few people opposite them were very weird, especially the middle-aged noble who had a strange expression and the black-haired woman who looked annoyed. Chris furrowed his brows. However, he did not manage in time to stop the blonde blood clansman from speaking. After all, he had dueled against them and knew that the masked person is an elite at the peak of supreme class. Thales' face twitched a little. Egotism is a disease, and you should be treated for it. Then, it's my turn to introduce myself. Thales scratched his head and said to the little lowly, my name is Thales, and I am around 7 years old this year. In the past. At this moment, Gines briskly walked forward with an annoyed expression, but Gilbert stopped her just as she was about to begin speaking. The gray-haired noble heaved a sigh. I believe that the alliance between us would not be too short, and Lady Serena also needs time to prepare to regain her throne. Therefore, we will be honest with you. Count Gilbert Casso raised his head and with a solemn expression, said a few brief words. This is Thales, Constellation's next supreme king. A long moment passed. A very, very long moment passed. Just as Thales felt that even the air was turning into stone, a gust of wind finally blew past. He giggled awkwardly and waved his hand at the 4 petrified blood clansmen opposite him. Thank you for your Sacred Blood Army's support and protection. Gines, who was behind him, snickered. Chapter 34 Gines Bajkovic. A troop of at least 30 cavaliers have broken through the main entrance. Signs of intense battle are everywhere from the lawn of the manor to the dungeon. At Vine Manor, a knight under the tricolor iris flower flag, Lord Seychelles, who wore green striped armor, frowned while stroking the manor's iron-made main door that was warped from the impact. The knights around him went searching for clues in the manor that has long since been empty of people for what little evidence they could find among the scattered corpses. At that moment, they heard the thin-haired Lord Seychelles say gravely, both parties launched a massive battle. Up until at least half an hour ago, this place was probably in chaos. Obviously, the Blood Clan lost the battle as all the dead bodies on the floor belonged to the Blood Slaves. The number of dead bodies also matches the one reported by the fleet that transported them. Based on the wounds on the dead bodies, the other party used high-purity silver weapons. They came prepared. All the members of the Blood Clan's Corleone family have gone missing. Either they were killed and their corpses carried away, were captured alive, or have escaped, maybe even all three. Whatever it is, we don't have to worry about the secret they harbor anymore. It has either fallen into the enemy's hands or disappeared without a trace. However, both situations are far from good. Seychelles' heart sank and stroked his sparse hair with his right, iron-gloved hand. Another voice came from behind him. The only good news is that the Duke wasn't planning to mobilize them anyway. That's why they don't know anything about our plans and movements. The neat-looking Lord Cassane was another knight with a lordship. He stood up from beside the corpse of a blood slave and looked at Seychelles. This is my fault, I will apologize to the Duke later. The knight's expression was horrifyingly dark, but this noble knight did not shirk his responsibility. He spoke with solemnity and with misery. I neglected the fact that I saw a large number of cavaliers during our journey. It seems clear now that they were the ones who attacked Vine Manor. If we had advanced at full speed then, we might have been able to stop them. However, Seychelles did not think so. His intuition told him that these cavaliers that attacked Vine Manor were extremely suspicious. Even if they were able to stop the troops, it might not necessarily have ended well. Even though both he and Cassane were supreme class knights of eradication. However, Seychelles knew that it was not the time to make his good friend even more miserable. The neglect due to his carelessness had brought about this mistake, and this had caused him to be full of self-blame. There are 2 questions that are in urgent need to be solved. Seychelles glanced at the mottled manor wall and entered the house. First, who were those people? Second, why were they here? Cassane entered the hall with his best friend. Although he could already smell the overwhelming stench of blood, when he saw the gruesome scene in the hall, he could not help but turn away. Compared to Seychelles, who was once a mercenary in the Eastern Peninsula and lived every day by the tip of a knife, Cassane's origin was much better than his compatriots. When the old Duke conferred the title of a knight to him years ago, he was a first-rate swordsman of eradication who had just completed his training at the Tower of Eradication and was a young, ignorant brat who had a bright future ahead of him. Ever since he became a knight of eradication, Cassane had not experienced a bloodbath greater than the tourneys in a very long time. If we immediately dispatch a unit to conduct a thorough investigation, we might be able to find some clues about these cavaliers. Cassane looked at the body on the table in disgust. It had been drained off all its blood, and spoke with a frown. If they are members of a certain family, then the best camouflage would be to enter the manors of various nobles in the eastern town districts. However, his compatriot, Seychelles, shook his head. He thought of the rabbits that roamed and scrambled around the prairies in the eastern peninsula. No matter how many clever traps the nomads of the Cell tribe set up, the rabbits always found a way to survive. The rabbits' only mortal enemies were the falcons who roamed the sky and could see everything happening on the ground at once. Seychelles followed the trail of blood and walked towards the dungeon. He opened his mouth to argue. We are already operating in a very flashy manner, and now you want to dispatch troops to search through all manors in the eastern town districts. Yeah, sure, we might be able to get some clues about those people, but that's only after we managed to offend all the people in the upper-class society in the entire constellation because we searched their manners. Since we can't uncover their identities, we can only identify their motives. Kassane picked up an everlasting lamp and covered his mouth and nose while inwardly cursing at these insatiable vampires. As he walked along the stone steps leading to the bloody dungeon, his voice became muffled and echoed between the dark walls. This place was lent to Blood Bottle Gang as a temporary encampment to receive and hide the elites of the Corleone family. However, both Nikolai and Corleone are nowhere to be seen. We and the Corleone family are behind the Blood Bottle Gang. This is an open secret among us. However, the aiders in the Corleone family have always been our secret contacts. That's why, if they are discovered, it is highly likely that whoever discovers them would trace their connections and discover our plan too. All the families who are participating in New Star know about the plan to an extent, so it's not something to be worried about. Lord Seychelles did not feel any difference at all as he walked through the blood-saturated air. He calmly analyzed, I have already sent someone to report this to the Duke. Blood Bottle Gang's contact will also arrive soon. However, what secret is the Corleone family harboring, to the extent of provoking these people? Kassane held an everlasting lamp and tried hard to maintain his composure. He stopped at a pile of ruins in the dungeon and sized up the place, his gaze full of puzzlement. It was obvious that these ruins used to be a prison cell. But right now, it was completely disfigured. It was as though it went through terrifying destruction. The iron fences, chains and stone walls had been smashed into tiny pieces, debris scattered everywhere in the cramped prison cell. It was as though someone had cut them into smithereens. The dungeon doubles as the Blood Clan's blood bank, Seychelles said coldly. Looks like somebody didn't really like this place. Whether it was vampires or people from Blood Bottle Gang, or even intruders, why would they destroy the dungeon like this? To vent their frustrations, Kassane asked, puzzled. The dungeon wasn't destroyed by them. Seychelles picked up small, black piece of mysterious material made of a stone that had weird patterns and words engraved on it. His face was somber. This is a dungeon. I'm afraid that a dangerous person who was locked here had escaped. The cavaliers who barged in had probably cleared this bloody manor by working together with this person. They coordinated by having one work from the inside while the other party worked from the outside. If Thales were here, he would probably be clapping for and praising this balding knight because his guess was very close to the truth. This degree of destruction, Kassane, who was frowning deeply, looked at the degree of demolition in the dungeon and said in awe, only supreme class elites are able to do it. No, Seychelles' gaze suddenly became extremely strange. He held the piece of mysterious, black, stone-like fragment and said, according to this shape, I'm afraid that this piece of stone was part of a shackle. I suspect that the shackles were used to chain up that mysterious person. The next moment, he flung the black stone into the air with his left hand. Seychelles' gaze sharpened as he drew his cross-hand guard saber from his left waist. The sharp and clear edge of the saber cut through the mysterious stone. During that instant, all was silent. A second later, invisible waves riding on the compression in the air swept through the narrow dungeon. Huge, deep cracks were etched into the surrounding walls. Behind him, Kassane nodded in admiration. This perfect swing was a balanced combination of precision, speed, and skill. The fortress flower was probably something like this. The sound of the saber cutting through stone finally came. Chang, asterisk. The sound was crisp and sparks flew in all directions. Boom, asterisk. The strong wind brought about by the swing of the saber simultaneously blew around their ears. The momentum of Seychelles' saber brought down plenty of debris from all four walls. As the strong wind blew, swirling clouds of dust filled the dungeon. The everlasting lamp in Kassane's hand was extinguished by the strong wind in the blink of an eye. The strong gusts vanished. Seychelles did not change his expression as he sheathed his saber. Kassane covered his mouth and nose. Although he disliked the dust, he reignited his everlasting lamp and bent down to search among the debris. As Kassane brought the mysterious black stone in front of Seychelles, both stared at each other. The two supreme class knights of eradication saw shock and fear in each other's eyes. The black stone, which had been cut by a supreme/elite saber, was resting on Kassane's hand, was completely intact without a single scratch. They were silent for a long time until Kassane spoke with difficulty. Looks like I was wrong again. This degree of destruction. Kassane turned his head, his face greenish and pale. Looking at the shattered dungeon, his face was full of disbelief. Even supreme class elites can't achieve this. Ellipsis. 11 o'clock at night. In a bedroom on the third floor of Mindy's Hall, the mysterious person who was the topic of discussion of the two supreme class knights in Vine Manor, Thales, who had recently escaped great calamity and wore clean, tidy clothes, sat awkwardly on the bed. He stared absent-mindedly at the female official, who was 40-something years old but still attractive and had a beauty mole beside her mouth. She was reprimanding two other people. Too bad, Thales thought, if only she was a little gentler. Is this the kingdom's heir that you people are looking after? Are you people savages? What His Majesty entrusted to you as his heir? Constellation's future, not some gray monitor lizard you can just throw on an island and expect to survive. With your manners, you people probably can't even take good care of a monitor lizard. The stately female official was growling in a dominating manner and reprimanding His Majesty's two most trusted followers, Count Gilbert Casso and Protector Yodel Cato. The two of them lowered their heads obediently and accepted the rebuke. His everyday diet consists of only bread and beef. Do you people know that he's growing up right now? Have you people actually given him a bath? Don't tell me that scrubbing with clear water counts as bathing. Can't you see that all his wounds need delicate care? Bandages, what is this? Have you people taught him the correct way of putting on clothes? Don't use the lack of time as an excuse. What sort of beddings are you letting him use? These blankets and pillows are practically child killers. You people have the audacity to prohibit him from going outdoors. Do you know how important sunlight is for growth? Safety, don't look for an excuse. Didn't he get kidnapped right under your eyes when he was indoors? Place the vampire girl in a room at least 100 meters away. What, there's no such room? Then go and dig one out now. From tomorrow onwards, apart from when offering protection and giving lessons, you both stay at least 10 meters away from him. You useless men. After a while, when Gines finished her angry reprimanding, she chased the two useless men out of Thales' room. Go and prepare everything on the list immediately. Gines. Then, she suddenly turned her head around. It terrified Thales, who was on the bed drinking a glass of water and watching the whole thing. He scooted a half-meter back. As he looked at Gines' stern eyes, the boy was reminded of the high school class teacher in his memories. However, Gines only looked at Thales hesitantly and with a complicated gaze. In the end, she sighed delicately, then forced a smile and tried her best to speak gently. Don't be scared, Thales. You are safe now and will always be safe. In the 1 month you're staying in Mindy's Hall, I will be wholly responsible for your everyday life. Thales swallowed a mouthful of water and nodded. Thank you, Heir. Gines continued her sentence softly. I am Gines Bajkovic, a first-grade female official. I am your father's loyal friend, follower and, how do I put this? Having said that, Gines paused, as if contemplating something. But in the end, she raised her brow as if she had thought of what term to use. She spoke decisively, and his lover. Thales could not hold it in and spat his mouthful of water onto the bed. Ellipsis. On a road not far away from Mindy's Hall, Yodel manifested in the air and kneeled on one leg in front of a muscular figure. You should go inside and take a look, Yodel growled. However, the muscular figure only remained silent. It took a while before he spoke. You're still the same as 12 years ago, the figure spoke slowly, always doing ridiculous things. Yodel knew that he was not referring to the incident in Vine Manor. But you sent Gilbert here. Yodel lowered his head slightly. You are also hesitating. The figure did not speak for a long time. In the end, he raised his head and looked at the lights shining out of the room on the 3rd floor. He then turned and left, flanked by a troop of elite bodyguards clad in silver armor. Only the masked protector's lone form was left kneeling under the moonlight. Chapter 35 Knights, Ordinary Class, and Super Class. Gines did not say anything else. She tended to his new wounds and told Thales to rest. Before she left his room, she also promised that she would let his life return to normal by tomorrow. But when nighttime arrived, Thales' sleep was restless. The things he had experienced during the past few days were just too bizarre. The terrors in Red Street Market, Mindy's Hall's sensational secrets, and his strive for survival in Vine Manor, had all made him extremely exhausted after thinking too much. Worse still, even after Thales had reached this point, he still could not get used to the soft mattress beneath him. It was as if his ability to fall asleep in his past life right when his head hit the pillow had vanished without a trace. Ah, Thales rolled his eyes. After tossing and turning a million times over, he got up from bed as usual, then went to his designated corner before he curled up his body and laid down. As expected, hard surfaces suit me more. Thales licked his lips. 2 days ago, he had been worried about the survival of the 5 child beggars in the abandoned houses and was plotting his grand escape. After that, his life had been filled with drastic changes, and he was like a duckweed without roots being blown by a violent gust of wind. He struggled in this world that was filled with evil and misfortune, and he had used every method he had at his disposal for his own survival. I just want to live well. But with this status, Thales looked at the wall above the fireplace. In the dim inner chamber, he could vaguely see the pattern of a huge star in the shape of a nonagon. Things such as living well and being a free person, Thales sighed deeply and thought, are probably wild dreams. Not to mention. Thales absent-mindedly raised his right hand. Under the moonlight, he looked at the bandaged abrasion there. What actually was? Thales recalled the moment he released Ralph from the shackles and the surge of explosion and light that appeared right afterward. What was that energy? Then there was the lowly vampire. When Thales recalled her mummified looks and the 2, almost invisible, round holes on his neck, he felt a surge of fear. And now, Thales was sure that his past life memories that often flashed inside his mind without reason were not just fragments. What sort of memories were able to support him to the point where he could suddenly exude superhuman strength and determination at the most dangerous moments, anyway? Although it had been 5 years since he came to this place, Thales realized in disappointment that his uncertainty and lack of understanding regarding this world did not diminish but instead gradually piled up. Ellipsis. Someone still woke up him by screaming into his ears while he was still on his bed and covered by his blankets. When he was sleeping, someone had returned him there. But today's atmosphere was significantly different. First of all, it was Gines who woke him up instead. She patiently explained to the flustered Thales the steps in putting on noble clothing. Next, his breakfast had also been changed to delicious cake and milk instead of bread and beef. The guards in the hall were walking back and forth busily, carrying inside item after item that had obviously just been transported here today. Gilbert appeared with a stern face and told Thales that his personally tailored classes would begin from 9 in the morning and until 9 at night. This made Thales truly feel that his daily life had completely changed. And although it was only the first class in the morning, the content was something he had never been exposed to before. After breakfast, Thales was led by Gines to a cleared, empty plot filled with soft sand in the backyard of Mindy's hall. Gilbert Casso was holding his exquisite staff and standing among a huge array of weapon racks, dummies for sword practice, archery targets, sandbags, horse-hitching posts, and a young foal. He spoke to him solemnly. After the incidents that happened these past few days, having gone through deep contemplation and after making careful choices, young Sir Thales, we believe that you are in urgent need of basic training for fighting and self-defense skills. And as a child who will be growing up alongside Lord Man, you should, naturally, be well versed with horsemanship and basic swordsmanship skills. Do not worry, we, especially Lady Gines, guarantee that the training will not affect your existing wounds. What? Thales let out a deep breath, then to his surprise, he saw Gines taking a step towards him. She spoke coldly. Do not be surprised, child, the morning is the best time to train your body. As Constellation's future heir, you must, of course, have a body that can bear this heavy responsibility, and I will make sure of this. Thales stared at the curvy Gines, who stood under the sun wearing the elegant attire of a female official. He looked at the empty space around him and scratched his head. Why isn't Yodel the one teaching me? He looks formidable. The boy recalled the secret protector who moved about the town area with swift movements. Do you expect a supreme class elite, who are hard to come by in the entire kingdom, to teach a newbie about the most basic things? Gilbert, who stood nearby, put his hands behind his back and continued, and, please believe me when I say that Yodel's tactics do not suit your status and traits. Thales nodded his head, not fully understanding what Gilbert had just said. What is a supreme class? At this, Gines clapped her hands, walked towards the middle of the field and gestured with her finger for Thales to come over. Gilbert will explain all this theoretical knowledge to you during the training. Now, attack me with all your might. I want to praise your existing basics. Thales watched, stupefied, as Gines put her hands behind her back and stood still in the middle of the field, and he continued staring until Gines opened her mouth to urge him again. All right, practice and level up. Isn't this what the older generation loved the most? Thales finally took a breath. He decided not to take out his dagger after some contemplation. The next moment, with street fighting skills that would pass for a child beggar, Thales lunged towards Gines. Without even moving her supporting foot, Gines easily tripped Thales, who had lunged with too much energy. Bang! Asterisk. Gilbert slowly began his explanation. Martial arts is the oldest and most long-standing skill in human history. Human history is one built where they continuously wage war against other races and amongst themselves. Thousands of years ago, in the process of fighting for the right to survive in this world, human beings gradually categorized the skills and patterns involved in using weapons or fighting bare-handed. Thales was tripped for a second time, tumbling onto the practice ground with his face dusty and dirty. Compared to other races, the human physical constitution falls way behind, and thus, they utilized these crafts and skills to win against the strong even if the humans were weaker, to fight against many even if the humans were few, and to wrestle those who were bigger in size compared to the humans. After a long time, some of the fighters who have mastered superb skills through such battles awakened powers within themselves that far exceeded human imagination. Instead of merely struggling and resisting, these powers granted human beings other choices in the world. Different powers came with different advantages, such as outstanding speed, nimble reaction, superb observation, and extraordinary strength. There are too many to count. This time, Thales nimbly dodged Gines' leg, which was trying to trip him again, and cleverly grasped her thigh-high boots. However, he was immediately kicked down again by Gines' cunning use of her strength. By relying on these powers, these group of superior human beings rode on warhorses, led skilled fighters, and embarked on a journey towards the dangerous world. These were the earliest batch of knights. Gilbert heaved a deep sigh and watched Thales, who was in a pathetic and disheveled state, fall onto the floor for the fourth time. He continued, and those powers that they have awakened are collectively known as superpowers. Today, After the Battle of Eradication, the humans, especially swordsmen, like to refer to those powers as powers of eradication. Due to the emergence of superpowers, the world established classifications of such abilities for the first time. For those who are agile in using fighting techniques and are refined fighters, we commonly label them as ordinary class. The elites who have mastered superpowers or other such abilities, and are capable of going into extreme detail when it comes to their control over their bodies and spotting the finest detail while observing things, and who are highly proficient when it came to fighting and battling have already surpassed the domain of ordinary human beings. This is why, having said that, Gilbert's eyes sparkled brilliantly as he finished his sentence, we call them superclass. Enough. Gines raised her left hand to stop Thales, who was unwilling to stop and wanted to continue lunging forward. She then pushed him onto the sandy surface. Quick-witted and good at dodging, knows how to use the greatest amount of strength possible, it's just that his body has not matured yet. I already know what to teach him. Gines exhaled, turned and took 2 sets of wooden swords and shields from the weapons rack. She threw the smaller set towards Thales, who was all over the place while trying to grab it. It's so heavy. Thales laboriously straightened the shield and imitated Gines in using the leather straps behind the wooden shield to bind and secure it to his left hand. However, he immediately realized that the posture put a huge burden on one side of his shoulders and arms. Thales held the wooden sword with his right hand. My goodness, compared to JC's dagger, this wooden sword might as well be those water vats in the abandoned houses. Tilt your body with your left leg forward and right leg behind. Place your weight between both of your legs and adjust it accordingly towards the back when defending or receiving impact. When attacking, tip your weight forward. Raise your shield and point it directly towards your enemy. Center all your defenses towards your chest on the shield, don't block your eyes. Gines' tone suddenly became cold and stern. No matter what, always raise the shield in your left hand up high. There are only 2 situations where you can put it down. When you are dead, or when the enemy dies. Thales strenuously raised his left arm. Soon afterward, it began aching. Whip your right arm around and treat the sword as if it is your second forearm. Use the weight of your shield in the first half of your body, then wave it as though you are using a whip. Thales, who was so tired that he was panting, raised the sword in his right hand shakily. He swayed it left and right with great effort while Gilbert's words resounded beside his ears. Aha, it's the Northland military sword style, the sword style that has a long history. At this moment, Count Queso's words were full of reminiscence and reverence. In the bard's poems, this sword style is the ordinary people's final weapon, the knight's body of fortitude, the Northland's barrier of ice and snow, and the orc's nemesis in the battlefields. His following sentence made Thales widen his eyes. Of course, it was also the sword style where superpowers originated from. Chapter 36 Starlit Night Alliance 1. 2 hours later. Watch your steps, steady your breath, the key to the iron body style lies in your feet. The instant you are attacked, adjust the distance between both of your legs and spread out your strength. If you don't want to die, raise your shield towards the enemy. Gines' crystal clear voice shot up into the air and a merciless strike followed. Thales clenched his teeth tightly, swung the sword in his right hand, which spurred his body to whirl along. The blood vessels in his left arm bulged as he used his shoulder strength to raise up the disproportionately heavy, wooden shield with all his might. He bent his right leg slightly and prepared to slide it further away according to the blow received to reduce the impact. Boom, asterisk. Gilbert, who was observing the battle from the sidelines, closed his eyes gently. After Gines' sword hit the bottom part of his shield, Thales lost his balance for the 25th time and fell on the sand again. But this time, he had exhausted all his strength and could not raise the shield in his hand anymore. Damn it. The boy panted heavily and tried his best to raise his head and chest. However, the heavy shield weighed down on his left breast, making him unable to struggle up to his feet from the floor. This woman cum his father's lover had been waving the sword continuously for 2 hours. But why does she show no signs of fatigue at all? The Northland military sword style originated from the age of ancient chauvinistic countries over 3,000 years ago. It took shape during the age of feudal kings, which was before the age of the ancient empires. As if able to read Thales' mind, Gilbert's voice resounded in the empty plot. Based on the records, the elves and the dragons were engaged in fierce battle during that time, and the feudal kings who reigned in the north were invaded by ancient orcs. This sword style was developed to battle fearsome opponents, whose strength and size far surpass human beings, such as the ancient orcs, or even dragons. Gilbert looked earnestly at Thales lying on the floor, and spoke softly, "This is the oldest combative sword style recorded in human history. Under such alarmingly huge disadvantages, humanity fought in battles until they almost sank into despair, and as they engaged in almost fatal resistances and suicidal charges, a group of knights became the first to awaken superpowers. Those powers are now known as the powers of eradication, and those knights became the earliest super-class fighters in human history." Gilbert's eyes shone with a brilliant sparkle. Lady Gines is one of the best among the super-class. Excluding the unique power of eradication she possesses, her observation skills, power, balance, and almost all physical attributes are on a different level than yours. The gap between the both of you is comparable to the gap between the tough, bold, and powerful ancient orcs and the weak, small humans in the past. Thales looked at Gines in awe and embarrassment. Honestly, even now, he did not know how to get along with his father's lover. She was exercising her wrist with a relaxed expression, as if paying no attention to Gilbert's praises. As a superpower is further used and the user accumulates more experience towards it, it will become stronger and stronger. The knights began learning how to wield their massive and profound powers, and to control their immeasurable strengths to the extent of having complete control over them. Compared to the super class, these knights, who are a step above, possess almost immeasurable strength and matchless skills. They began to understand the fundamentals of power in battles. They can transform freely, fight without limitations, and finish a battle with the highest efficiency and the smallest loss possible. Gilbert took a step forward and nodded his head at a spot in the air with a barely noticeable move. They are known as the Supreme Class, the strongest warriors that have surpassed the limits of their powers. Thales looked at the sky absent-mindedly and thought of Asda, who could control the air to her heart's desire, and Yodel, who moved like a phantom. Ordinary class, super class, and supreme class. This classification of power spread widely to people of all races around the world after humanity prospered. Gilbert looked at the weather and nodded at Gines. The ancient orcs, the ancient elves, even the psionics began using this system of classification. All of these originated from the ancient Northland military sword style, from the courage to fight the orcs and the dragons for the sake of survival. Gilbert's words put Thales in an absent-minded state. Now, the ancient orcs are no longer a threat, and the dragons are extinct. The Northland military sword style is no longer passed down to the people. Even within the army of Extant Kingdom, the kingdom that prides itself for having Northland blood and occupies the land of the ancient Northland, this swordsmanship has long since been abandoned. Now, the only places that retain the full legacy of the Northland military sword style are Constellation and the Tower of Eradication. Miss Gines is one of the few people in the world proficient in this skill. Young Sir Thales, when it comes to this sword style that once saved our ancestors, please harbor respect in your heart and practice relentlessly. A sword style used to battle orcs and dragons. No wonder, Thales thought gloomily after snapping out of his daze, I was thinking about why the sword felt like lead when I swung it. Recalling the way he, like an idiot, raised the shield and waved the sword, how it led him around, his footwork pulled by the inertia of the shield, and his training with Gines being trained by her, he felt as if he was just being whacked around like a sandbag for 2 hours. He could not help but heaved a sigh while feeling speechless, and with a face full of regret, he fell backward. That will be all for this morning, your wounds from before are showing signs of tearing. Gines looked at the sun in the sky, threw her sword and shield down, and spoke with her usual, cool expression. These 3 sets of defense tactics of the Northland military sword style will be your homework for the week. As for horse riding, Gines looked at the foal happily dancing around a butterfly by the hitching post. She then looked at Thales, who struggled to free his left arm from the wooden shield. She, too, heaved a sigh and shook her head. Go take a bath and eat your lunch. Gilbert has specially prepared indoor lessons at 1 in the afternoon for you. Afternoon lessons, my God, do I have to self-study at night, too? Thales, who was used to living the disorderly life of a postgraduate student, heaved another sigh. As he felt his whole body ache, he closed his eyes and resigned himself to fate. Constellation's most exalted, illegitimate child resignedly took off the equipment from his body with great difficulty, pulled his left arm out of the shield, and limped into Mindy's hall. He only had an hour to bathe and eat. I have to admit, his comprehension and ability to learn things is good. After only 2 hours, he had tentatively understood the fundamental spirit of this sword style. Gilbert watched Thales leave and broke the silence. He nodded his head lightly as he spoke. When I was his age, I used my body to practice using the sword. This child uses his brain to learn the sword. Compared to this, do not tell me that your observation skills are so bad that you did not notice the abnormalities of his body. Watching Thales' figure disappear, Gines' face suddenly became grave. As she talked to Gilbert, who was beside her, she sized up the air around them with suspicion. I still remember that the person with that cursed mask can see even a speck of dust 100 meters away. Stop looking, Yodel is not nearby. Watching Gines' nervous actions, Gilbert put his hands behind his back and spoke in a level-headed manner. Ever since Thales was unexpectedly kidnapped by the Blood Clan, Yodel has tailed him every single moment without ever leaving his side. And we noticed, Gilbert spoke and frowned slightly, that child is only around 7 years old, and has sustained considerable injuries 2 days ago. However, in 2 days, he had almost completely recovered, and could practice the sword under the sun for 2 hours without much difficulty. No wonder the Bloodline lamp, which is used to detect those with the blood of the royal family, did not react for a whole 7 years. With this physical constitution, he cannot be described as a normal human being anymore. He heaved a sigh and tried his best not to think of the other possibility. Jadastar family, as expected of the oldest surviving royal bloodline in the world. Gines was also silent for a while and tactfully did not say anything else. The female official bent down and swept the dust off her boots. Speaking of vampires, why did you reveal Thales' identity to them and invite them to stay in Mindy's hall? Do you really believe in the agreement between Thales and the distressed Archduchess? After all, he is only 7. And you should be aware that the vampires have killed our people before, we can't trust them. Besides, to the vampires, we are an unexpected accident, it is impossible for them to trust us, either. You have already spoken the answer. Gilbert's eyes sparkled as he thought of the old blood clansman who had a still and deadly countenance, but was full of wisdom. It is precisely because both parties lack trust, fear each other, and even threaten each other that I did all these things. That is why we have to use the secrets we have and things that will benefit both sides to tie down each other. This is what you would call tacit understanding and cunningness in terms of diplomatic relations. It's not the same as a clear and straightforward, investigative search. HMPH, you're just trying to be mysterious and secretive. It was as if Gines was reminded of unpleasant memories. As she left the training field and walked into the hall, she said with annoyance, another Morat. Thank you for your praise, respectable Lady Gines. Gilbert tilted the hat on his head and laughed tactfully. I do not deserve such an honor as to be ranked alongside the head of the kingdom's secret intelligence department. And Gilbert did not take Gines' impolite disregard to heart. He thought internally, although that child is only 7 years old, when it comes to guile, he is definitely not inferior to the Archduchess who is a few hundred years old. Ellipsis. When Gilbert and Gines arrived at Thales' study simultaneously half an hour later, Thales, who had bathed hastily and was having his meal, was watching the expressionless, red-eyed, little girl with a frown on his face. Her followers, Istrone and Rolana, were having an unfriendly stare down with the swordsman of eradication who had Thales completely surrounded till not even a fly would be able to pass through them. Step back, vampire. A bodyguard who looked like the leader was glaring angrily from behind his helmet and spoke with unpleasantness, we do not welcome you here. Don't get me wrong, I don't like you people that much either, you mortal creatures. Istrone's nonchalant words further annoyed the bodyguards. Do you remember that I slaughtered 8 people like you just yesterday? He spoke with a sarcastic and provocative tone. The frowning Thales bit a mouthful of carefully seasoned beef short ribs from the fork in his hand. He had not eaten this delicacy since he transmigrated here and was so touched that his heart gasped in admiration. At the same time, he carefully avoided the obviously problematic gaze of the baby-faced little girl sitting across from him. It was just a pity that this taste will probably never compare to the dog meat he once ate together with Jala. Thales observed the situation before him and heaved a sigh. What a headache. You will never have such a chance again, despicable rat that hides in pots. The head swordsman's tone had dropped to freezing point and the silver sword at his waist was 1 foot out of its sheath. Why don't you try and take another step forward? I am very eager to avenge the death of my comrades. Or I can just pull open the curtains and let you all bask in the sunlight. The countenance of the handsome blonde blood clansman turned sour, and he decided to go 1 step forward. Don't get riled up, boys. Rolana pulled her fuming cousin 1 step backward just in time. Although her lips were curled in a smile, her tone was stern and serious. Servants, step back, your master and our master have an agreement. Looking at the swordsman of eradication in front of her who could not wait to kill them, Rolana's playful countenance became even more vibrant. This was what your master said, we are allies now. Shouldn't we forget the animosity of the past? After all, it's just 8 lives. The emotions of the swordsmen of eradication became more unstable. A few of them even clenched their teeth so hard that the sounds of them grating their teeth could be heard behind their helmets. As expected of cousin sister, Istrone thought inwardly, especially when he looked at the angered guards who had to restrain themselves. It really makes my heart sore. Gines, who was outside the room, frowned and was about to walk in when Gilbert grabbed her arm. The gray-haired ex-diplomat shook his head with a mysterious look on his face and pointed at their little master, who was sitting on a chair behind the guards. Gines made a puzzled face. Her puzzlement continued until she saw Thales, who had finished his last bite of food and put down the cutlery, burping in satisfaction and sliding down from the chair. What should I do? Looking at the meaningful gaze of the 3 blood clansmen, Thales contemplated the problem. However, he soon had an answer. Thank you for your protection, Cora. With you around, I'm very assured of my own safety, Thales said with a smile and tugged the lower hem of the head swordsman's armor. Cora, who had laughed when his stomach was poked by Thales on his first morning here to determine whether the guards were made of stone, was the leader of these guards. He was also the one who arranged for the guards to kill the attacking mercenaries one by one. He knew that when it came to these loyal guards, he should not wave his hand and dismiss them with authority and arrogance, like what the main characters in most simplistic novels do. Moreover, to protect him, they had recently sacrificed 8 of their most reliable comrades. To face their arch-enemies and not immediately take out their swords to kill was already a rare show of self-restraint. Although they were already allies on paper, but to pretend that nothing happened and to dismiss his own people in front of outsiders would only turn the guards' hearts cold with disappointment, even though it would feel great to dismiss them with a wave of his hand. Thales put on a stern expression. I need all of you to do me a favor. We will follow your orders. Although his facial expression could not be seen, the head guard's respectful tone said it all. The swordsmen who were able to stay guard here were all the most trusted and elite private soldiers of the Jadastar family. They were not informed of the situation, but based on the task received and the interactions of the past few days, the guards have made almost accurate deductions regarding the boy's identity, who was personally brought in by Gilbert and Yodel. Due to past incidents, I do not trust the handsome Sir Istrone Corleone, and his beautiful but equally dangerous cousin-sister, Lady Rolana Corleone. They have caused me plenty of humiliation. Their existence makes me troubled, worried, and frightened. Thales frowned and clenched his teeth tightly while he spoke. As though there was really great enmity between them. Istrone and Rolana were shocked and looked at the Archduchess behind them at the same time. However, the latter did not bat an eyelid. We only need your word, young sir. Cora's gaze behind his helmet became sharper. The sword on his waist was drawn another foot. And our swords will leave their sheaths for you. Having heard that, the swordsmen pressed their hands on the hilts of their swords. Bound by a common hatred for the enemy, their gazes became more and more unpleasant. Very good, I want their heads so much. Thales' countenance was cold, and he glared at Istrone with deadly eyes. The swordsmen took a step forward together and vaguely surrounded the Blood Clansman. Istrone looked at the boy's expression, his heart jumping a little. Rolana bared a fierce expression and unfolded her arms. It can't be. Istrone felt an unreasonable fear in his heart and took a step back without noticing it, until the Archduchess's cryptolalia was heard next to his ears. Steady, Issa. This childish voice that only Blood Clansmen could hear put Istrone's mind at ease. He does not intend to turn hostile. But because of the sacred alliance, I cannot hurt them in my own house. That is why, apart from this, young lady, chase the other two people out into the corridor, Cora. Thales pouted and hugged his arms tight as he ordered coldly. If they so dare to disturb the private conversation between me and Lady Serena Corleone, Thales' eyes shone with a cold glint, making the already traumatized Istrone anxious. The boy turned his head and continued to speak to Cora mercilessly. Cora, and everyone else, you all will have a valid excuse to take your revenge. Especially that one with blonde hair. Istrone's heart tightened. If our swords leave their sheaths, we definitely will not disappoint you. Cora nodded with a determined gaze and extended his arms towards the door of the study. Vampires, you have heard it. Get out, the corridor is where you people belong. Istrone, who had a furious expression, wanted to say something else but was stopped beforehand by his cousin-sister. Rolana perfectly hid her shock and smiled mysteriously. She then respectfully bowed towards the little lowly, Serena, and dragged Istrone out of the study. Outside the room, Gilbert flashed a smile, and, along with the astonished Gines, made way for the guards and the Blood Clansmen. The two groups, who were staring at each other with caution, left the study and continued their standoff at a corridor some distance away. Good afternoon, Sir Corleone and Lady Corleone. Gilbert bowed neatly, his elegant mustache curled up slightly. I know that the members of the Blood Clan have exceptional hearing. It is much too easy to listen to the events in the study from here. I wonder if eavesdropping counts as disturbing the private conversation between Sir Thales and Lady Corleone. The guard, Cora, who was standing beside them, and the rest of the swordsmen immediately walked towards them with an imposing aura. You want to eavesdrop? Rolana's smile immediately faded while Istrone's face turned green. When she saw the angered swordsmen forcing the Blood Clan to the stairs and stopped moving while they were there, Gines became absorbed in her thoughts. If that is the case, Gines lowered her head silently. Then what Gilbert said is true, he's really an intelligent and level-headed boy. But he's a little too intelligent and level-headed. Thales breathed a sigh as the crimson-eyed lowly watched him strangely. He closed the heavy door to the study and considerately drew the curtains to block the sunlight. The study on the second floor was perfectly soundproofed. Gilbert had assured him that even the Blood Clan would not be able to pick up a single sound with their hearing. All right, we were in a hurry yesterday, but now, Thales exhaled and said sternly, let us talk in detail about the clauses in the alliance. And go especially into the details about my blood and how you would serve me. Oui, well, due to the size of her body shrinking to that of a small lowly, Miss Serena spoke with a lisp. She too nodded her head seriously. Why don't we add in your status into the clauses that need to be discussed as well? Puzzlement appeared on Thales' face, but his expression changed drastically when the crimson-eyed lowly said her next words. This Archduchess, the woman in the shape of a small girl, the true heir of the Corleone family, the rightful sovereign of the Hill of Pain, Her Highness Serena L.A. Corleone, spoke softly with a lisp. And that is the problem of you not getting your birthright as a P-Wince ACKN knowledge even after such a long time has passed. What they did not know was that when Thales had skillfully dodged the guards and the Blood Clan's irresolvable grudge and was negotiating with Serena, Chris Corleone was hiding in the shadows of the chimney, which was right above the second-floor study, also that he could avoid the sunlight. His posture was bizarre, and his face was expressionless. All right, the pale Chris Corleone's ears twitched and turned his head to speak. Our men didn't start fighting. I believe that Her Highness should be negotiating with that young friend of ours. We're both supreme-class fighters, you know. There's no need for us to remain in such an awkward position, right? Right across the old Blood Clansman was Yodel Kato, the masked, strange man who had remained silent from the beginning until now. Only when he said these words did Yodel put away the short sword he held in his hand back into his shirt, and he gradually faded away. Chapter 37 Starlit Night Alliance 2. The next king, last and white, your followers exaggerated your status. The girl with the baby face pouted. She was dressed in clothes fit for a child, which had been prepared for Thales, and she was looking quite a funny and cute sight as she sat down on the carpet beside the fireplace and continued speaking in her lisp, but we have realized that right now, you are not you and a P-wins. Of course not. In the entire kingdom, people who know that the king has a son can be counted with less than 10 fingers, Thales thought internally. Should I have told you that Gilbert deliberately said that because he got annoyed looking at that blondie showing off? Thales rolled his eyes in his heart. I thought. Thales took a deep breath, looked at the pair of red eyes in front of him and said, we have already agreed in fine manner. Since my blood is delicious, if you forget about draining my blood dry in one go, I will regularly provide you with a small amount of blood. While enjoying my blood, you must serve me, and I will ensure that all of you have a safe place to stay in Constellation. But you do not possess the power, Serena said slowly but surely, to protect us. All right, it's true that I am only an illegitimate child, that is why, it's not me, but my father who will guarantee your safety. Serena stared right at him and broke him off suddenly. But you are not your father, you are not the king. That is why, Thales exasperatedly said, I am really sorry, but you and your people are already at Mindy's hall, and we already know your secret. I guess the Covendier family would not welcome you back either. Half a pint, the red-eyed lowly said with an expressionless face. What? Your bee would, I want half a pea-wind of it daily. She looked somberly at Thales' eyes. Half a pint, daily. Thales narrowed his eyes and looked at the Eastern Peninsula's Archduchess. All this just for my blood. This boy's blood is unique, Serena thought to herself. It was exactly this blood, full of life and energy, which had roused me from my deep, muddled sleep. Of course, to realize that someone was biting my neck the moment I woke up was not very pleasing. Serena pouted her lips in annoyance and touched her neck. Thales, don't forget that yesterday, the mummified version of this little girl almost took your life, Thales thought in disdain. Recalling that a mummy had sucked on his neck like a suction pump, Thales rotated his neck unnaturally as well with mixed feelings. Both quietly stared at each other until one of them broke the silence. Are you kidding? Half a pint daily? Why don't you just suck all my blood straight away? Thales stood on tiptoes. He would not be able to reach the table otherwise because he was too short, and smacked the table, staring back at her without showing any sign of weakness. But he still felt apprehensive when he occasionally thought of her mummified appearance. I ardently wish that I could devour every single DWOP of bee-wood in your bee-woda. Serena's red eyes glared at him as she replied in a serious and eerie tone, but to have you supply bee-wood to me long-term is a deal that is much more worthwhile. Aren't you a calculative person? Thales replied sarcastically. A quarter pint daily, I need to recover as fast as possible. Serena's gaze became cold and her tone was final. Do you think I'm a cockroach, that blood is replenished every time I level up? Thales clenched his teeth tightly as he met her gaze squarely. To give you blood daily, not a chance. I do not understand what you are talking about. The aloof lowly efficiently ignored the crazed words the boy accidentally let spill out of his mouth. Once every week, 2 pints. Once every half year, a-10th of a pint. And this is only for the sake of our amicable agreement, Thales said fiercely. Once every 2 weeks, 1.5 pints. Please use your actions to p-wove your amity. At most, once a month. I need time to synthesize new blood after losing it, okay? Serena slowly stood from the floor. Her red irises gazed towards Thales, making the latter shudder. Brat, do not challenge my patience. My interest in your bee-wood is the only reason you are still standing here in bee-wething air. Serena's eyes narrowed, and her unchanging facial expression suddenly became cold. If we decide to leave without caring for all the sacrifices we have to suffer, your Pwepple will not be able to stop us. Moreover, Serena's eyes moved about mysteriously but she did not look away from Thales' gaze, making the boy's hair raise. This PWAce conceals Constellation's secret heir. Do you think that the lords and nobles would be interested in this? Thales felt himself shudder in fear. This damned old witch, Thales criticized internally. However, experiences with field research from his past life made him aware that as the other party in a negotiation, he must not show any weakness. Sure thing. Thales tried his best to force a pleasant smile. Your younger sister must miss you very much, too. Especially after you came to Constellation for a vacation, and even transformed into a cute and plump little girl. I won't be able to become the heir at the moment, nor will you be able to return to Night Kingdom. Since we are so compatible. Thales smiled even more delightfully. Why don't you just marry me? The moment he said that, Serena's expression did not change. She did not move her gaze, and neither did she move her body. But for some reason, a shudder racked Thales' body at that moment, and he felt a chill that seeped right into his bones. Both parties stared at each other for more than 10 seconds. Amidst the silence, Serena slowly and softly uttered a sentence. It seems that you really intend for our relations to turn sour. As she spoke, Serena suddenly cracked a smile, revealing her tiny fangs. Thales was shocked. His right hand, hidden behind his body, trembled. JC's dagger was already ready in his hand and could be used to strike at any time. Well, then, Serena curled up the corners of her lips mysteriously and licked her fangs. From this angle and with this distance, I can continue talking by beating around the bush with her for more than 10 seconds. Thales lowered his head, furrowed his brows, and swallowed hard. If Yodel had not bumped into Chris, he would have been able to rush here. The guards, Gines, and Gilbert were also at the corridor. But Istrone and Rolana, damn it. Since they reached the worst possible outcome, Thales had no choice but to accept it. He bent his calves slightly and spread his feet apart. He prepared to raise his left arm high and held the dagger steadily with his right hand. He was obviously about to pull off a standard, iron body, style. Northland military sword style. Although I only practiced it for 2 hours, I hope that you are well worth the effort. Thales laughed wryly in his heart. For the first time, Serena suddenly flashed an unsettling smile. Her young voice rang in the air. It sounded especially scary to Thales' ears. Then, I have no choice but to compromise. I will follow what you said. Once a month it is, then. As for the number WOF pints, Thales, it is up to you to decide. Use my left arm as a shield and block her first attack. Based on yesterday's experience with the mummy, I don't know if she will, Thales then processed what Serena was saying. What, compromise? Thales' mouth widened in shock to the point that it was big enough to fit 2 of Serena's fists. I was about to deal with her, gently, but the enemy surrendered. Why aren't things going according to the script? Something scarier happened after that. 2 faint dimples appeared on Serena's adorable face. The little loli smiled bashfully. My dear Thales, since I have compromised, shouldn't you do something to show your sincerity too? Thales frowned and looked at her with suspicion. He found that he could not react to the expressionless, silent, and emotionless girl suddenly transforming into a loli with a bright smile, akin to a blooming flower. He could only answer with a hoarse voice by going with the flow. What, cough cough, show you, how? The little girl's smile became even brighter. At that moment, Thales suddenly thought that those strange red eyes were actually quite beautiful. The young and capable Prince Thales. She smiled amicably. Let's form an alliance. I will assist you in getting through this quizzes, so that you will be CW own success fewy. And you will support me. Serena's pupils shone with a strange bright light. In seizing back my throne. Thales was stunned. Seizing back, her throne. The Eastern Peninsula's, Night Kingdom. The cute girl blinked. This goal is too far away. Thales scratched his head. His dagger had long since been tucked back into his pocket. He spoke with some slight awkwardness and hesitance. If I really become king one day, then, based on the situation. Before he even finished speaking, the loli's eyes sparkled brilliantly and she slowly inched towards him. Thales stared in befuddlement as the strange girl extended both hands and softly held his right hand. I know that Thales really needs me. Before Thales could pull his hand back, he saw the pair of red eyes watching him with a teary gaze. Blinking her unusually coquettish eyes, she pouted her lips and shook her arm slightly, just like how a normal, playful, little girl would. As he stared into her gaze, a shudder swept through Thales' entire body. His mind felt dizzy for some reason. For the sake of not revealing your identity, you cannot simply let us go. Serena bit her bottom lip and curled her lips into a smile that would have enamored other people. And because of my value and my side of identity, you can't get rid of me easily, either. This is why we have no choice but to form a mutually beneficial alliance. The girl used the soft skin on her arms to gently rub the back of his hand. Her eyes shone with an odd but submissive light. Instead of being F-wood by the situation and being dragged along by the FWOW, just like what happened to us in the manor, isn't becoming allies and whelping each other something we common. This way, both of us will feel more unrestrained. Thales pulled his arm back with a disgusted expression. However, the odd sensation behind his hand lingered. If this reduces the animosity between us, Thales heaved a sigh. We can work together, temporarily. However, for now, we can only provide you shelter. As you can see, I am in a very awkward situation too. Before my status is acknowledged, I am unable to help you regain your throne. Okay. Serena's expression suddenly turned cheerful, like a normal girl who just found her doll. She bit her bottom lip and nodded continuously with a delightful smile. I understand. I knew that Thales treats me the best. Because of her smile, the girl's eyes turned into the shape of crescent moons, and she held onto Thales' arm again. Thales raised his brow. He was not used to her being like this. Out of reflex, he wanted to pull his arm back, but the girl held onto him with a tight grip. Serena's expression changed again. Her smile turned into a hesitant and hurt look. It's just that, the girl pursed her lips like she was being wronged and poked Thales' arm. Just that, what? Thales quirked his brow again, feeling as if he could not handle this anymore. It's just that it's a bit Serena shook Thales' arms and spoke with a pitiful expression. 1/10 of a p-wint per month is a bit too little, I will starve to death. Thales' face turned black. Why don't you go and suck someone else's blood? Beckwaus, I feel that Thales' blood is the most special one. The girl looked like she was about to cry, blinking her eyes as she spoke. We are good allies, aren't we? Thales furrowed his brows. His head was beginning to ache. In the end, the agreement of blood provision was set at 1/8 of a pint per month. Thales had calculated this with his fingers for a while. It was not a lot. However, he still felt that he was on the losing end of the deal. Obtaining the H-whelp of 2 Supwem class elites, and a Supwa classy white, through this, Serena suddenly reverted into an expressionless loli and spoke with a piercing gaze. Your J warny towards becoming the heir will only beck Wome smoother. True, Thales thought gloomily, with the support of a strong nation in the Western Peninsula, your journey towards seizing back your throne would surely become smoother, too. And, for the sake of my promise to Thales, I will work hard to H-whelp you become the heir and ascend the throne. Promise. Thales' face twitched. I obviously didn't agree to that just now. Why is she making assumptions? But, what's up with that face? Why did it suddenly become cold again? As he watched the loli sashay out of the room, Thales suddenly realized that his body was drenched in cold sweat. He constantly felt that something was not quite right. Oh yeah, I have a question. As she was just about to leave, the loli turned and spoke with her usual, expressionless face. What is the secret of your B-wood? How could such a small amount awaken me? What you took yesterday was obviously not a small amount of blood. The baffled boy grumbled in annoyance. To answer this question, please refer to books, reference materials, or other forms of relevant documents and literature. You can ask my parents directly if you want to. Surprisingly, Serena nodded her head seriously. If the chance arises, I will. She raised her gaze. Your B-wood and my stewing, your thwun and my thwun, our alliance is actually wee beneficial for us. In the next moment, much to his surprise, Thales saw Serena swaying her young body while taking a step back. For this, I apologize for my and my followers' impertinence. I earnestly hope for your tolerance and forgiveness. Serena bowed again, her plump little hand held her imaginary skirt. She spoke softly with her childish voice, future Prince Thales Jadastar. Thales was stunned. Thales Jadastar. This was the first time somebody called him by this name. It was just as Serena said. As of then, he was not even a prince. The transition from child beggar to a prince. As expected, I'm still not used to it, Thales thought with distress. This witch, Thales, who was drenched in cold sweat, kept reminding himself. And she was completely expressionless just now, too. Should I be saying, as expected of the ex-archduchess? Having thought that, Thales heaved a deep sigh, feeling a little defeated from the day's negotiations. He earnestly extended his hand and helped the loli up. Although the two children's actions looked funny, their expressions had turned extremely serious. Your Highness Serena Corleone, I accept your friendship. Thales extended his right hand in front of Serena with a serious gaze. Starting from now, we are allies. Serena watched him with sparkling red eyes. After a moment, she also extended her plump little hand and placed it in his palm. Of course, constellation and night, may our cooptation be a P-weasant one. The two little hands held and shook each other lightly. And also, in the future, ask your followers to stay away from my guards. The hatred between them is one that cannot be resolved. Thales looked at the little girl in front of her, who only reached his shoulders, and spoke meaningfully. Next time, there's no harm in you talking to me regarding the issue of your restoration. There's no need to waste time and effort testing my attitude towards this matter. Istrone's acting skills were too horrible. When it comes to this, we need to be straightforward and trust one another. Trust. Serena's red pupils constricted a little and she nodded. Of course, future Prince Thales. If you and he with the Thwun, and we both establish a Starlit Night alliance, our relationship will become a special one. Serena flashed a strange smile. For the sake of both our countries' futures, we might even establish a marriage contract. Of course we need to trust one another. The dejected Thales felt his face twitch. He was stunned so speechless that he felt like puking. Can someone please come and take this lisp-afflicted person away? Chapter 38 Battle of Eradication 1. 3 in the afternoon. What is it? In the study, Thales put down the quill he was using to copy the alphabet that was used by the public during the era. He waved his hand impatiently and looked at Gilbert, who had been staring at him for the past hour. Excuse me for my rudeness, Sir Thales, Gilbert spoke with a soft smile, but you might be a natural-born diplomat, provided that you do not choose to become an astronomically wealthy businessman. If I knew he would react this way, I wouldn't have told him what happened. I should have just told him that I played hide-and-seek with that little girl for half an hour in the room. Thales thought gloomily and crossed out the lopsided S below his quill. Thales was very annoyed. There was no other reason for his annoyance. After the negotiation with Serena, whenever Thales thought of the Archduchess's flexible and versatile expressions, as well as her transition between icy coldness to friendliness, he felt that something was not quite right. So Thales had asked Gilbert to analyze the situation for him just now. To put it simply, Thales had fallen for Serena's trap. It might have seemed like Serena was forced to compromise on the issue of blood provision, but they were in Mindy's hall. Everyone, including Gilbert, Yodel, Gines, and even his unreliable father, His Majesty the King, would not watch idly if half a pint of blood was drawn from his body daily. Which was to say that 1/8 of a pint of blood monthly was obviously within her estimation. So, without making any real compromise, Serena managed to bargain her way into making an ambivalent promise from Thales. Help her retrieve her throne. Thales realized with annoyance that he was the losing party in the negotiation. Businessman, diplomat, why do I feel as though you are laughing at me in your heart? Thales lowered his head and opened another page of the Cahill's Falling Leaves poetry collection Gilbert gave him. He copied the sentences, identifying the individual words and their usage. The night was about to welcome light, the sky had yet to become bright. The holy sun's former splendor was hidden in the lands. The land was about to shatter, the sea about to spill over. The evil demons gathered their strength in the dark sky. After he copied this duplicate containing the style of poetry usually applied when Orientals wrote about day and night, Thales pouted his lips and tried to understand the meaning behind it. In the beginning, Gilbert was especially worried that Thales would have a weak foundation to culture and tailored a massive plan to speedily improve his language and writing especially for Thales. This was because typical street rogues usually could not recognize any letters other than their own names and the numbers written on coins. This was the norm. However, ever since he transmigrated to this place, Thales had paid close attention to the words around him. Together with his ability to speak the language and his brain, that at some unknown point of time, seemed to run like those computers that had their RAM increased, it only took him a little over an hour to master basic alphabet recognition and learn how to write them. After that, Thales easily entered the stage where he could spell individual words and copy long sentences. His progress was so fast that even Gilbert was in awe. Again, he could only attribute it to the Jadestar royal family's outstanding blood. Thales rolled his eyes at Gilbert's reaction over this. No, you handled it considerably well. Gilbert walked to his side and watched as he copied the entire ancient poem. I have asked some people to read up on materials and information about Night Kingdom. Serena Corleone may not be as well known as her younger sister, who is exceptionally skilled when it comes to handling matters, but she is indeed related to the Nightwing King. She was already around even before the Third Peninsular War and might be more than 400 years old. Despite being under our shelter and in an abject situation, she ordered Istrone to coerce you into making a choice between your followers' loyalty and the benefits that come with forming an alliance. She affected your reputation among your followers and then did all she could to remind you about the fact that you are not the heir yet to destroy your self-confidence and courage. Both instances fully exhibited either the cunningness of a blood clan archduchess who has lived for many years, or the intelligence of that supreme-class butler. Fortunately, you did not let her have her way when it came to this. Instead, you left her with no choice but to act in a manner that was shameless to obtain what she wants. I knew it, she's a witch. Thales spat in his mind and continued copying the poem. The gods fell into the world, hell's river roared, the land transformed, the color of blood spread, the vast army marched on, the snowy mountains collapsed. The hero raised his flag, the king lifted his spear. The empire has fallen, the world has darkened. The living were frightened, lonely and homeless. What is this person even writing? Thales furrowed his brows and read these descriptive sentences. He asked absent-mindedly, so you just stood there and watched them bully me? Gilbert did not say anything. He only watched Thales quietly. Wait. The hand which Thales used to hold the quill suddenly froze. He looked as if he had thought of something. His highly efficient brain began automatically collecting every single element and linking them into a paragraph again. His identity. Serena's identity. His promise to help her regain her throne. Their treaty of alliance. The indifferent Gilbert. In Serena's words, I will work hard to help you become the heir and ascend the throne. Gilbert, Thales quirked his brows and opened his mouth wide, looking at the former Foreign Affairs Minister in disbelief. It was you. The former Foreign Affairs Minister's mouth curled into a small grin. His mustache curved into elegant arcs. Oh yeah, I still remember. Thales exhaled and uttered in realization, last night, you were the one who told them about my identity. You didn't do it because you were angry at their impudence and arrogance, nor was it because my status was being undermined by those people. Thales stood up in front of the study table with a dubious gaze. This was your plan all along. Gilbert did not admit nor decline it. He only shrugged his shoulders playfully in a rare show of mischief. This allowed Thales to confirm his suspicions immediately. It was indeed Gilbert's plan. FCK. You deliberately revealed my identity because you guessed that they might seize this opportunity and take the initiative to negotiate with the heir to the throne while he is still in a dire state. That way, they can strengthen or add to the treaty to obtain the promise that I will help them after I ascend the throne. It might take a long time, but since they are the immortal blood clan, they can afford to wait. Damn it, Thales cursed Serena inwardly, that witch obviously had a plan, but still acted as though she was super anxious to recover her abilities and go back to the Eastern Peninsula. Damn old man, damn witch, Thales thought in annoyance. I guess you have your own reasons for doing so. Thales let go of his emotions and furrowed his brows. Gilbert lifted his hat and bowed in his line of vision. There is no trust between us and the Corleones. We harbor suspicions towards each other. It is extremely dangerous for us to live under the same roof in the name of cooperation, even though this is our territory. As for your blood, safety, Gilbert chuckled and spoke darkly. I never believed that these unreliable things can guarantee a stable cooperation. We might have a fallout with the Corleones at any possible time and endanger ourselves. However, the situation is different now. Your journey to becoming the heir and her mission to seize back the throne are bound together. To obtain your help, she must first help you. Although unexpected, you have used a promise that can only be carried out in the future after becoming king in exchange for immediate and reliable help. Gilbert smiled mysteriously, obtaining allies by binding them to you using benefits as the essence of politics. And helping her regain her throne. Thales narrowed his eyes. Gilbert exhaled, his eyes shone with cunning. If you do not become king, how would you be able to help her regain her throne? As for what you said, regarding me watching idly as they bullied you. It is, of course, part of my duty to share your burdens. However, to develop you into a qualified heir, and to protect you from any sort of harm are both equally important duties to me. Gilbert smiled and spoke, Serena Corleone is only an abject foreign dignitary and you will be Constellation's future. I thought that I would just let this be a small test to you. Small test, Thales lowered his head and rolled his eyes again. Since you had this intention, why didn't you go straight to them and suggest an alliance? The indignant Thales replied stiffly. My young Sir Thales, Gilbert blinked, diplomatic negotiations are like sword tournaments. Although whoever attacks first gets the first strike. They will at the same time, expose their steps and trails. There is nothing better for us than for them to suggest an alliance. I will just quietly watch you act all smart and all that jazz. The boy shook his head and thought bitterly. Thales grumbled in annoyance, what a bad diplomat and politician, to even manipulate your own people. All right, Gilbert only narrowed his eyes and smiled as he lowered his head to look at his pocket watch. After copying these poems that you do not understand for so long, I am sure you feel tired. Thales stopped moving the quill in his hand. You can rest for a while. Since we are already on the topic of politics and diplomacy, this is an opportunity for us to conduct a history lesson. Gilbert said, smiling, obtaining obvious benefits is not the only reason alliances are forged. Gilbert sat on the expensive sofa and tipped his hat. Imminent crisis also leads to that, as well as shared beliefs. Thales put down his quill and began paying earnest attention to Gilbert's words. This tale depicts how the disunited human beings and the other influential forces within the other races became the most loyal allies, even though they were filled with distrust towards each other. Gilbert's eyes shone with bright light. Thales suddenly felt that Gilbert had become slightly serious. This is what Cahill's Falling Leaves poetry collection depicts, the tale of that battle over 600 years ago. Count Queso's next sentence made Thales widen his eyes in shock. That cruel, dark, bloody, horrific and earth-shattering battle depicted in historical poems, the Battle of Eradication. Ellipsis. In the deep and dark secret chamber, an old and raspy voice drifted into the air. So, the wealthy families are showing signs of activity. Yes, my dear teacher, a cynical, lazy voice replied. Supreme class elites and plenty of super class elites are departing from various strange places and gathering at the borders of various county towns in the north. They all share one similarity. Investigation shows that none of them have anything to do with nobles and suzerains. Can you get the exact date? The hoarse voice spoke apathetically. I'm afraid that it's difficult. The same voice replied with a light-hearted tone, even people from the extant diplomat group itself have not finalized their exact route. So, should we send people to continue investigating and inform the king about this? After some time, the raspy old voice replied with finality. No, your focus is still that doctor in Blackstreet Brotherhood. I want all resources to be tilted towards that. Don't look down on Lance. After all, he came from here, and he knows our tactics very well. Investigate the whereabouts of all the Blackstreet higher-ups, especially the three main assassins, Black Sword, Prison Sickle, and Reversed Machete. It's too difficult to find them, but we must at least make sure that they're not nearby. I'm sure Black Sword is not stupid enough to shelter a wizard. And, even if all goes well, don't let your guard down. After all, we have not waged war with any wizards for over 100 years. Records and handbooks can only be used as references in the end. A long moment passed. Okay then, after a moment, the young voice said noncommittally, speaking of which, are we really not sparing his life? After all, it is a living and breathing wizard. In the darkness, the sound of a person sitting up from a chair rang. There's no need. The raspy old voice appeared after it. They are something that had already vanished long ago. Let it be completely buried, along with the Battle of Eradication. Chapter 39 Battle of Eradication 2. Battle of Eradication, such familiar words. Thales had watched a number of plays in Dark Knight Temple beside the Grand Bazaar, even though his concentration was mostly focused on how to steal money from the pockets of the entranced audiences. Undeniably, all the priests in Dark Knight Temple looked neurotic. They wrapped themselves up to the point that not a single bit of wind would enter through their clothing and touch their skin, and chanted crazy words such as, "The Lord will return, the world will inevitably collapse for the second time," and, "Histories are all lies, the only one who saved the world was the true god of dark night," every day. Fortunately, they didn't chant something like, "The long night is approaching, evil is everywhere, Ryan, pay some attention. That wealthy person is about to turn away," the child beggar, Thales, who had been watching the play. However, for Thales, who was illiterate after transmigrating, the plays they staged were definitely a good, gratuitous way to understand the world. Perhaps it's not such a good way. Thales, who had been walking behind Gilbert, thought of a play called, "The True God of Dark Night descended upon the world and personally rescued 33 princesses," and could not help but pout. Among the various plays, which ranged from those that were absolutely absurd, to those that served as a warning to humans, Thales remembered one called, "The Day Calamity Fell, the Hour the World Was Eradicated," especially well. That was about the Battle of Eradication. Even now, Thales still remembered that amidst the backdrop, which had black and red as its main colors, a masked man in black held chains with a sickle and circled the entire stage with heavy footsteps. The background tune often became gloomy and scary at this moment, frequently making the curious children below the stage who were watching cry. At the positions where the man in black walked by, actors wearing headgears of various colors to symbolize places around the world wailed and cried, falling down one by one on the stage. He still remembered the frightening words spoken by the narrator, who sounded like a cawing crow. "Calamity is coming, calamity is coming, it will not let go of anyone, will not let go of this world, until every single person is seized by calamity. Wake up, my friends, wake up, wake up, calamity will engulf everything, hell's river will overflow into the world and heaven will collapse onto the earth. The world is on the brink of eradication. The gods will always be with us, and the demons are also beside us. The emperor stands behind us, and the warriors are before us. We can only survive through fighting bravely, and only dark night is eternal. My friends, calamity is coming. Dark Night has said that the boatman at Hell's River does not have a detestable face, neither is he an inhuman, evil fruit, or a demonic flower, but he can corrode a person's heart. We must be willing to wield our swords and return home in glory with our heroes so that we will not become the slaves and underlings of this calamity. This is the last battle. Make no distinctions between ourselves, make no distinctions between the sacred and the mortals. The battle of eradication, with dark night enveloping the world, calamity will definitely disappear." In Thales' indistinct memory, in that crazy play, the character who held the chains with a sickle, who was the so-called calamity, slaughtered countless living beings until it was defeated by the union of the entire world. However, until the end, none of the priests and actors of Dark Night Temple explained what calamity truly was. When children on the streets questioned them, the priests would make them utter, "Dark night shall return, and I am willing to serve." The priests would then give them a piece of barley sugar candy and say with a smile that calamity is the world's enemy. Thales, who was deep in thought, did not notice that Gilbert had led him before the second-floor stairs. The 3 giant portraits of Constellation's kings which he saw when he first arrived hung neatly on the wall. Lusark Colvin is a famous portrait artist in the era of Mendes III. His portraits strive to portray the spirit and vitality of each person as best as possible by combining history, environment, and movements. Gilbert stood still below the portraits of the 3 late kings of Constellation and spoke with an engrossed tone. The 3 Constellation kings, just as His Majesty explained to you before, these are the very few kings and sovereigns among the masterpieces Colvin left behind. A master's work. Upon hearing this, Thales raised his head and carefully looked at the middle portrait on the wall. The young knight with his 7-pointed star insignia held a spear while riding a horse. Judging from his posture, he was probably charging forward. The last time Thales saw the portrait, it was only a quick, rushed glance. He had the time to observe it carefully today. He noticed that the long spear, held by the young knight with a valiant and heroic bearing, had a chipped blade. His royal crown was also damaged and mottled. His armor was covered in splashes of blood, and his horse looked fatigued. All the knights behind him were injured. Some held up their shields and charged forward, some were covered in blood, some of their armors were torn, some of them held each other by the arm while on their horses, some only had one arm left. The area in the distance under the setting sun was littered with dead bodies and weapons. There were very few people left standing, serving as lonely decorations for the devastating battlefield. Blood and darkness were the other colors that dominated the color scheme. Apart from the young knight with a 7-pointed star on his crown, who looked like he was letting out a frenzied roar, the 6 people behind him had desolate and sorrowful expressions. However, their faces still showed no hesitation in charging forward. They moved forward behind Tormund I, who was holding up his spear and roaring fiercely. Having seen this, Thales' heart stirred. He suddenly remembered what Kessel V said. This is Tormund I, the last prince of the final empire, and the founder of Constellation. Known as the King of Renaissance, his bravery in the Battle of Eradication is still being eulogized even now. He is. Thales' expression changed slightly. He looked at Gilbert, who was beside him. Yes, the King of Renaissance, Tormund Jadastar. Gilbert answered with a profound expression. After the Battle of Eradication over 600 years ago, among the surviving Empire commanders in the Western battlefield, he held the highest status and position. He is also your ancestor, the man who founded Constellation after the battle. Western battlefield, surviving, Empire commanders, highest status, and position. Thales immediately caught the keywords. Empire commanders, which empire, what was his status? Apart from the Western battlefield, were there other battlefields? Who were Tormund's enemies? Gilbert was used to Thales' learning style, cutting Gilbert off at any time and raising questions, or even refutations. He smiled without taking any offense and said, it was, of course, the one and only empire, the empire. The only empire. Yes, Gilbert inhaled and flashed a nostalgic smile. Did you know, young Sir Thales, that the known world used to be a broad piece of land shaped like an arm? And our kingdom, Constellation's original land, was at the position of the wrist. Thales raised his head abruptly. What? He cut Gilbert off in shock. A piece, an entire piece of land. What about the eastern and western peninsulas which are separated by the Sea of Eradication? However, Gilbert only smiled and raised a hand, gesturing for him to be quiet in front of the late king's portrait. Listen to me until I finish speaking. The answer lies in the Battle of Eradication. However, Thales had already thought of an answer in his mind, which was not far from the truth. Battle of Eradication. Wait, the ocean between the two peninsulas is called the Sea of Eradication. Two peninsulas. Having thought of this, Thales could not help but poke fun at the situation. Gilbert, are you going to tell me that a strong celestial entity led an army and invaded our world? And then, after a fierce battle, we managed to thwart their efforts. But we accidentally shattered a magical well which exploded and separated the world into two peninsulas. Gilbert's smile froze. What? And then, the one on the west was called Kalimdor. Shish, Gilbert could not help but smile and cut him off. My young sir, you indeed possess the ability to write novels and create stories. If it was not for your identity, perhaps you could become a splendid bard or poet. However, we are having a history lesson right now. Thales shrugged and stopped speaking. He kept another piece of newfound memory in the deep recesses of his mind. It was still one related to the girl with adolescent delusions. Gilbert continued watching Thales patiently until he stopped speaking, and became solemn in front of the portrait of Thales' ancestor. He then continued his explanation. Over 3,000 years ago, after humans realized their superpowers, many super-class and supreme-class elites appeared. Their troops' combat power and equipment were also strengthened ceaselessly. Following many years of friction, war, and union, almost 2,200 years ago, humans finally coalesced into one. For several successive years, they were victorious in battles against other races. They became the rulers of the known world in the continent. Gilbert displayed an expression of reverence and longing. His gaze drifted about as he spoke airily. They built a gigantic nation with a surface area that extended to the whole ocean and the entire continent, almost penetrating every corner of the known land. Apart from a small number of Far Easterners, almost all humans, the Rudalians, Northlanders, Nedanese, Coluntians, and Crimson Earthlings, were under the nation's protection and rule. They did not give their country nor their dynasty any names. The highest ruler regarded himself as the Emperor. The unprecedented country that did not have and did not need a name was known as the Empire. Thales gasped lightly. He did not feel glory nor pride in his heart, only sadness and sighs. War made the state, and the state made war. He quietly added a sentence in his heart. He learned this during his past life from a great author's book. Coalescence and war. These words can be spoken easily. To forge an unprecedented, gigantic nation, how many battles were needed? How much blood was shed and how many massacres were involved? However, Gilbert's expression immediately became gloomy. Just when the empire had ruled for almost 1,000 years, a new race, so strong they were almost terrifying, quietly emerged among the humans. They are immortal and cannot be destroyed, with unparalleled strength and unmatched power. The strongest among the supreme class were powerless to stand up against them, and even true gods and demons were no match for them. To make it even scarier, they have different thought processes and rules of conduct compared to other humans, or even other races. They are impervious to reason, stubborn, insane, and hard to communicate with. Thales froze slightly. It was as though the crazy figure in blue robes with brown hair appeared before him again, mouth opening and closing. The newborn mystic made a foothold high above the gods and watched over the other living things. Thales recovered his attention. He saw Gilbert heave a sigh. They are like calamity. Since they arrived in the world, they continuously brought about chaos and disasters, blood and massacre. Having dealt with these huge blows, the once great empire slowly declined and, in the end, perished. A new race emerged among humans, impervious to reason, calamity. Thales recalled something and his heart began beating erratically. During Tormund I's era, which was the century the empire calendar was superseded by the calendar of eradication, the empire had already perished for over 300 years. The world where the humans and other races lived had gone back into a state of chaos and dissension. The final empire, where Tormund lived and was only a nation built by refugees of the former nation, one which took on the name of the Empire. In terms of structure, territory and its people, it was a completely different nation. Customarily, the historians label the previous great empire as the Ancient Empire, and the latter, weak empire as the Final Empire. In the year 1509 of the Empire calendar, which was the year the Battle of Eradication occurred, the Final Empire was only a nation of average strength in the world. Instead of bringing them pride and legacy, the spiritual heritage and the name of the Ancient Empire became a source of burden and hatred. They became the target of ambitious, past territories, eager creatures from other races, and a plethora of greedy nations. Although the Final Empire inherited the Ancient Empire's glory, they made enemies everywhere and was constantly engaged in battle. Moreover, their taxes were high and internal disorder occurred for years on end. The imperial family was incompetent and governance was weak. It seemed that the glory of the empire was about to end in the year 1509 of the Empire calendar. However, on that same year, that race, along with those calamities, had bewitched a considerable amount of people around the world into becoming their believers and followers. With an unprecedented strength, they formally declared war on all civilizations in the world. Thales was slightly stunned. With his clear grasp of logical reasoning, he had already caught a few illogical points within the narration. However, he did not immediately point them out, and instead restrained himself. What exactly are the calamities? What does emerging among humans mean? Since they had such great strength, why didn't they continue working towards dominating the entire continent after they destroyed the Ancient Empire, but instead waited until the Final Empire emerged before they formally declared war? If they are completely impervious to reason, why did they want to recruit followers and believers like a true god? If their thought processes are completely different to humans, why did they want to declare war? To conquer the world, is this a joke? This is basically a story full of loopholes. However, Thales was aware that this was not because Gilbert deliberately misled him, but because right now, there was a lot of information that Thales could not understand at all. Just like those secrets about the bloody year from before. Those calamities, Thales gulped and asked with slight anxiety, what are they? Gilbert did not find Thales' question strange. However, he did not notice that Thales' tone was less confident and steady compared to usual. He heaved a sigh. After the Battle of Eradication, all information and sources related to the calamities were sealed and banned. This is an unspoken agreement between the gods, demons, and humans, and also a countermeasure to prevent their numbers from increasing. As the years went by, the horrors of the calamities slowly faded away. The names and existences of the people who were regarded as calamities were also slowly forgotten by many people. However, as the king's only heir, you will have to know about all of this sooner or later. Gilbert inhaled deeply and spoke with a severe countenance. All those calamities were either once humans, or a member of other intelligent races. However, desire, greed, and ambition drove them to become a foreign species who had lost their innate character. Even though they are no different from us most of the time and might even be hiding among us, they are truly an entirely foreign species. According to folklore and most people, these calamities had a common name. Gilbert cleared his throat and enunciated each syllable clearly and slowly with a severe countenance. Mystics. At that moment, Thales had to use all his willpower and mind to suppress his body from trembling too much. In their eyes, mystics are only another category of psionics who are seemingly equal to strong warriors like the Knights of Eradication and psionic warriors. With a freezing gaze, Gilbert continued speaking. However, only the countries and temples that participated in the Battle of Eradication know that these so-called mystics are actually the fearsome calamities that were a curse to history for thousands of years, had spilled plenty of blood on their hands, had eradicated both dynasties of the empire, and almost destroyed the whole world. They will only notice that something is wrong and get a hint of the person's identity when they try to kill a mystic. At that time, it would often be too late, because these calamities known as mystics are immortal and indestructible. Young sir, Gilbert said sternly, in the future, if you are unfortunate enough to encounter a mystic, you must first protect yourself. When you are safe, try to seek help. We have a method designed based on the weaknesses of mystics that can be used to fight them. Thales kept a straight face as he touched the wound on his left hand, but his teeth chattered slightly. Unfortunately, he had already encountered these calamities. Even though Thales' heart was filled with questions, for his own safety, he could not question Gilbert too eagerly. Who knew what he might reveal in his anxiety? However, this is still not right. If mystics are such a fearsome existence, why do they have to go around contending for small gangs? Why does Constellation let their blood bottle gang flourish in the kingdom? Another questionable point. So many questionable points. Gilbert paused for a moment, as though wondering why Thales did not speak nor ask any questions. However, he did not suspect much. Instead, he shut his eyes and contemplated about something, only softly speaking after a few minutes. There is no need to doubt their dreadfulness. These calamities are truly too strong. Over 600 years ago, under the leadership of strong warriors, our most powerful and bravest army fought their underlings in a bloody and frenzied battle. After breaking through their outer defense line, the most skilled knights and warriors besieged those calamities, but were killed en masse in battle. Thales thought of the play in Dark Knight Temple. On stage, along the path, calamity walked by, the actors fell one by one. The gods descended one by one upon the world and then perished. The demons rose on earth and were then destroyed. Warriors of various races went to the battlefield and were then sacrificed. The battle continued for many years. After paying a devastating price, we finally discovered their weaknesses and finally defeated those calamities. Thales clenched his fist tightly. It was as though Asda's desolate words rang beside his ears. We lost. Gilbert's words interrupted his flashback about Asda. However, the strength of those accursed calamities was too outrageously frightening. In the final, decisive pursuit that surpassed the abilities of those in supreme class, those accursed calamities, those mongrels that could almost destroy the world. Thales, who had been carefully observing the charging Tormund, shuddered. He suddenly knew what came next in the story. Gilbert calmly uttered the next sentence. They sank the weakest peninsula in the center of the large continent, which connected all the peninsulas in all other directions. All the living beings and materials there were completely annihilated. After the peninsula sank, the residue of that power spread out, causing the entire continent to be pushed apart from each other in two different directions. Within 5 short years, the depths of the ocean that was formed could no longer be seen, and it tore apart the land that we knew into the eastern and western peninsulas, along with a countless number of islands. This is the famous, Great Crack and Sink, that happened 600-something years ago. The Battle of Eradication ended like that. Gilbert emitted a long sigh, and what he said next made Thales momentarily dazed. That sunken peninsula contained the entire territory of the Final Empire, and the Final Empire was put to an end. Chapter 40. The Empire shall last, so long as the stars do. The Empire sank, the skies fell and the earth cracked. The capital of triumph, the Empire's capital city, which had over 2,000 and 3,000 years of history since the era of the feudal kings, and had witnessed the rise and fall of both dynasties of the Empire, was completely buried at the bottom of the Sea of Eradication along with the perishing of the Final Empire. Gilbert's compassionate words even affected the guards standing on both sides of the hall. Thales could feel that their hands, which were pressed on their sword hilts, were trembling slightly. Gilbert pressed on Thales' shoulders and looked at the young knight on the wall, who was perpetually roaring while charging forward, but seemed like he could never reach the end. As for Tormund I, at that time, he was not yet a king, he was one of the surviving citizens of the Final Empire. Thales could feel the powerful grip from Gilbert's hand. The former Foreign Affairs Minister quietly opened his mouth and recited a few lines from Cahill's Falling Leaves poetry collection. The hero raised his flag, the king lifted his spear. The empire has fallen, the world has darkened. The living were frightened, lonely and homeless. After 10 years of blood and fire in war, the soldiers returned with shouts of victory but were no longer able to return to their previous lives. In their homeland to which they fought ceaselessly for, no blood remained in their noble families, all of them had lost their lives. Upon saying this, Gilbert spoke in a trance. Thales, my young sir, can you imagine that feeling? Thales stared blankly at Tormund, who was advancing courageously. The young knight looked so brave and fearless. Even in the unbearably devastating battlefield, he looked gorgeous and radiant. At that time, did he know that he would never be able to return to his homeland? Gilbert did not wait for Thales to reply. He heaved a sigh. No, at least not for me. Thales did not speak but had a strange feeling in his heart. The living were frightened, lonely and homeless. Thales calmly recited the next 2 lines of the poem. The living were frightened. In his imagination, a grand and majestic city appeared. However, it was sinking slowly. All the people were running for their lives, shouting in panic and seized by trepidation. However, they could only watch helplessly as the ocean drowned everything. At this moment, Thales suddenly raised his head and asked with a melancholic and slightly depressed tone tinged with indignation for the suffering the citizens had gone through. What about those people? Gilbert, who was immersed in his recollection of the King of Renaissance, turned his head and looked at Thales in puzzlement. Thales was also looking at Gilbert. He calmed his emotions, and his gaze was placid. The members of the royal family, nobles, knights, and soldiers were not the only ones there. They were participants of the battle anyway. There were also countless people who lived on that piece of land. Farmers, merchants, the elderly, and children. The boy spoke with a mild tone. All the people who, regardless of birth, regardless of status, and regardless of race, were involuntarily dragged into this battle. During the battle and when the land sank, they were more innocent than the calamities, the emperor, the nobles or any other person. However, they were the empire's true purpose of existence. Did none of them manage to escape? Gilbert gazed at Thales with slightly narrowed eyes, as if he had just met Thales and was sizing him up all over again. You are just like your grandfather who was sympathetic towards the populace, young Sir Thales. Gilbert heaved a sigh. You have a sympathetic and kind heart. Sympathetic towards the populace, actually using the word, sympathetic. Gilbert has probably never placed himself in the same dimension as the populace. As for being sympathetic and kind, Thales quietly shook his head in his heart. However, Gilbert immediately lowered his head dejectedly. His eyes were full of grief. No, All the citizens of the final empire in the entire world, from nobles to the commoners, sank into the ocean. Only Tormund and his army remained as proof that the final empire and the ancient empire were not a myth. They truly existed. Thales lowered his head and shut his eyes, lightly heaving a sigh. At this moment, Gilbert's hands, which were on Thales' shoulders, exerted force slowly and gradually. He uttered the following words slowly and clearly, and at that time, Prince Tormund was the most unloved, illegitimate child in the royal family of the final empire. Thales' whole body trembled, he whipped his head back and looked at Gilbert in disbelief. He now knew why Gilbert wanted to tell him all this. Forget about titles, territories, and assets. He did not even have the right to inherit his family name. Even the title of Prince was only a form of courtesy towards him. Gilbert looked at Thales with a determined gaze. Compared to you right now, he had even fewer things he could call his own. The circumstances he faced was 100 times more perilous than yours. Thales stared blankly at Gilbert. He then looked at the illegitimate child on the wall, who was also a king. Gilbert shook his head and removed his hands, which were resting on Thales' shoulders. He then continued to speak. They won the battle of eradication. Humans in the entire civilized world were joyously celebrating the mighty victory. The world's political climate was also constantly changing. In the east, Senjem, the king of mountains, carried the hopes of the Far Easterners and established the main Adnox dynasty, after overthrowing the previous dynasty. Amamaimo Handball raised a flag and began spreading Handball dynasty's great reputation among countless believers. In the west, the hero Rikaru Extit was crowned as king amidst cheers from the crowd. The strong and prideful Extit kingdom was thence born. However, compared to this, Gilbert looked at Master Colvin's artwork solemnly and compassionately. The final empire, which inherited the glory of the empire, lost all its land and people overnight. Only the last of her kin remained. Overnight, the originally insignificant illegitimate child became the only remaining supreme leader of the empire that ceased to exist. Tormund had no land, people, provisions, nor riches. Apart from the 6 knights with him, he had an army of only 2,000. They advanced into foreign lands with trepidation, severed hopes, and a dim future ahead of them. Tormund, who was 24 years old, moved between various forces of powers and feudal lords. He used all possible methods to obtain even the slightest bit of fodder, the tiniest amount of provisions, encampment, or even a batch of weapons, from groveling and begging to arguing strongly on the basis of reason, from pleasing words and flattery to swindling and robbing. He ensured his subordinates' independent survival and protected the empire's last remaining dignity. Every day, the lonely Prince Tormund struggled in battles, conspiracies, ambitious dreams, and authority, trying hard to survive amidst other people sneering at him, jeering at him, using him, and harboring ill will against him. When he was only 26, he had a head full of white hair. Gilbert put his hands behind his back. His eyes were filled with reverence. The final prince of the final empire. This was how the people in both peninsulas ridiculed and mocked him. Thales gazed fixedly at the bright and valiant prince without saying anything. 10 years went by. The group's headcount became smaller and smaller, along with their hopes. Finally, after a battle laden with casualties and deaths, his despairing subordinates held their comrades' dead bodies and surrounded the haggard Prince Tormund. They questioned him, crying, "What is the purpose of continuing this fight? The empire has perished without a single inch of its territory left. We are like trees without roots, the ashes of history, and will finally wither away without a trace. Why battle still? Why don't we just give up now?" Thales trembled slightly and looked towards the prince. The ancestor's gaze had become different. "When you have nothing, and everything has perished, what are you fighting for?" Gilbert looked at Thales' expression and sighed compassionately, but he immediately put on a determined gaze and expression. "Thales," for the first time, Gilbert addressed Thales sternly and without honorifics. "You must carefully listen to my next words." That night, while being called into account by his subordinates and while shedding tears, Tormund took off his worn armor and uttered the most important vow in his life while pointing at the countless stars in the sky. At that moment, Thales saw that the guards were standing straight on both sides of the hall in a respectful manner. They had their heads lifted high and their chests puffed out. The sounds of armor clashing against each other instantly rose in the spacious hall. With a stalwart expression on his face, Gilbert spoke with a solemn and respectful voice, "The empire shall last, so long as the stars do." Thales sucked in a deep breath. The empire shall last, so long as the stars do." Thales thought about the meaning of these words. Just as the middle-aged noble had finished speaking, all the soldiers and guards in the hall began walking slowly and with great force. The sounds of their footsteps echoed in the air. Thud, asterisk. Immediately afterward, they placed their fists in position and struck the gold-and-silver shield with the 9-pointed star. Bang, asterisk. The spacious hall was instantly filled with a clear echo. Thales, who was stunned by the history and was still in a daze, was terrified to the point that he took a step backward. Thales. Before he could react to the situation, Gilbert suddenly crouched down and held the boy's shoulders. Then, once Gilbert looked into Thales' eyes at his eye level, he spoke seriously. Please do not underestimate yourself, your blood, and the meaning behind your status in your blood. Your existence as well as the Jadastar family's existence, symbolize humanity's golden age. It is the strongest proof that the great ancient empire, the heroic final empire still continues to exist in the world. At that moment, Gilbert's eyes were filled with excitement. His hands trembled violently for some unknown reason, causing Thales to be anxious. Gilbert continued speaking loudly. September 27th, year 10 in the calendar of eradication, that is the date constellation was built. Prince Tormund pointed at the stars and pledged his oath that he would change his family name to Jadastar, and become Constellation's founding king, Tormund I. After several decades, Constellation became the most powerful country in the Western Peninsula. It was known as Western Peninsula's Blade and Shield, along with Extit. The empire was reborn from ashes. With Constellation as its name, it emerged once again in the world. Its splendor continued once again, and its greatness was revived. When people spoke about Tormund Jadastar, no one remembered the former, final prince. They only knew him as the King of Renaissance. Gilbert's mustache twitched, and his eyes shone so brilliantly that it looked as if there was a fire burning in his eyes. The Jadastar family's motto was born because of that as well. Thales felt a little ill at ease, even though he was also deeply moved by Tormund's story. However, when he looked at the zealous Gilbert before him, Thales still found it difficult for him to fuse with these emotions. Does Constellation exist only for the empire that only existed in the past? There's something off about this attitude to form a kingdom. There's definitely something off. A feeling of discord and discomfort attacked Thales' heart. However, when he saw Gilbert's eyes burning brightly in expectation and heard the sounds of breathing from the guards that had clearly become much heavier, he could only grit his teeth and nod deeply. Thales frowned and repeated that sentence after them. The empire shall last, so long as the stars remain. At that moment, a lovely yet reprimanding voice filled with anger traveled into the hall. Enough. Thales and Gilbert turned their heads at the same time, and Jines Bykovic looked at the teacher-student pair with a displeased expression on her chilly face. It is dinner time, she said coldly.